Chapter 101. Yelp, Yelp. After successfully selling the 6 energy cubes, Ice Vulpix lifted its head and beamed proudly at Owen, as if to say, "Aren't I amazing?" All right, you're the best, Vulpix," Owen laughed, scratching the little fox's belly. Seeing the delighted look on its face, he teased, "But don't get too overzealous. If every customer starts petting you, you'll shed all your fur." Ice Vulpix froze for a moment, then cocked its head and considered Owen's warning seriously. After a moment of thought, it realized the truth of his words and gave an embarrassed little whine. Owen grinned. He reached into his storage ball and pulled out a strip of cardboard, quickly scrawling in bold letters, "Wutong Town Community Training Center." He propped it up on the table, then turned to Gardevoir with a friendly smile. "Here, why don't you sit here with us?" He settled himself on the wooden bench, cradling Sweet Bamboo in one arm and Ice Vulpix in the other. Gardevoir paused, looking down at the ground as if feeling shy about taking a place beside him. Owen called her name gently. "Gardevoir?" "Okay," she replied with a soft nod. Smoothing the hem of her gown, she lowered herself carefully onto the bench next to Owen. As he glanced around at his Pokémon, content, peaceful, and all together, Owen felt a warm, unexpected satisfaction. In that simple moment, with his team by his side and their makeshift sign fluttering in the breeze, everything seemed just right. Owen stood behind his stall amid the bustling crowd, cradling Sweet Bamboo and Ice Vulpix in his arms. Gardevoir sat gracefully at his side, Monarch Snake coiled protectively behind him, and neatly arranged bowls of fresh fruit and stacks of energy cubes lay ready for passing travelers. He glanced up at Rotom, who hovered nearby, and called out, "Rotom, snap a picture of us, please." "Rotom, okay, master." The hovering electrical Pokémon zipped forward, clicked off a single shot, then floated back to Owen's shoulder. Owen quickly pulled up the image on his Pokégear. Just as he'd hoped, the photo was perfect. Gardevoir's serene poise, Monarch Snake's proud, raised head, and the 2 youngsters in his arms, one a bit solemn, the other bright-eyed and cheerful, were all captured in a single frame. He tapped the screen approvingly. "That's just right." Rotom gave a satisfied hum at the praise, but Owen noticed more and more hikers now crowding around his stall, peering at the treats and asking about prices. Realizing he couldn't squeeze in any more photos, he set his Pokégear aside and greeted the first of the customers with a confident smile. Even without putting on a show, his Pokémon's natural charm and the quality of his goods drew people in by the dozen. Business was booming. Owen's market stall stood out from all the others. Bright banners, neatly arranged display cases, and even a miniature fountain bubbling beside his sign. Still, customers hovered at the edge, brows furrowed, peering at his prices. "Boss, I get that Moo Moo fresh milk is a premium product," one shopper said, tapping his chin. "But why does your Tianzhu juice cost so much? And the rice wine, are bottles really a few hundred yen each?" Owen met their questions with a calm smile. "I know it's steep," he said, gesturing to the rows of glass bottles, "but every drop is handcrafted. If it's too much, feel free to try something else. Our energy blocks are a bargain compared to these." He nodded toward the neatly stacked cubes whose vibrant colors hinted at potent, nourishing power. At that moment, Owen tucked his most recent achievement next to the register, a gleaming Advanced Breeder Certificate. He'd earned it only days ago, after weeks of grueling exams and field tests. No sooner had he set it on display than murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Customers who had been skeptical about his offerings suddenly leaned in, inspecting the energy blocks and trays of crystal-bright tree fruit salad. Business picked up instantly. One after another, shoppers loaded their baskets. But despite the surge in sales for his snacks and recovery blocks, neither the Tianzhu juice nor the hand-pressed rice wine found any buyers. Beside the stall, Owen's loyal Tianzhu watched with drooping tendrils. Every time someone glanced her way, at the very plant whose sap became that ruby-red juice, she felt a pang of disappointment. If her juice didn't sell, she knew Owen would lose out on the profit she'd worked so hard to produce. Owen caught her worried look and gave her a reassuring pat. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I know it's special. We'll find someone who appreciates it." He offered her a small smile, though inside he shared her concern. His venture depended on every product, not just the crowd pleasers. Still, With the breeder certificate shining in the afternoon sun and his Pokémon fanning out around the stall, Owen felt a surge of confidence. Today's success with the energy blocks and fruit salad had proven that quality always finds its audience. He just needed to prove it for the rest of his wares, too. Owen noticed Tianjuju's shoulders sagging in the midday heat and decided to drop his juice prices a little, hoping to lift her spirits and boost sales. Just then, something curious happened. A young couple trudged up the mountain path toward his stall, clearly in the middle of an argument. The girl's cheeks were flushed with anger as she demanded, "Why can't you ever understand me?" The boy stammered apologies, but his efforts to soothe her only seemed to make things worse. Finally, without a second thought for cost, he plucked a cup of Tianzuju's special juice from Owen's display and handed it to his girlfriend. The moment she tasted it, her fiery glare faded. The flush drained from her face, her shoulders relaxed, and her voice came out in a gentle murmur. The boy stared in astonishment, then broke into a wide grin. "It's so hot today," he said, sliding another coin across Owen's counter. "Give me a bottle of rice wine and ice Vulpix. Can you add some ice, please?" Ice Vulpix, perched dutifully by the cooler, chipped off a few cubes and dropped them into the bottle. The boy took a long, appreciative sip. Then, as if summoned by the mountain breeze itself, an overjoyed impulse seized him. He reached for the girl, pulled her close, and kissed her right there on the crowded trail. Her cheeks bloomed pink. She pressed a playful fist to his chest, half in mock outrage, half in delight. But her bright smile said it all. She wasn't really mad. Arm in arm, they turned and hurried down the slope, vanishing into the milling crowd. The onlookers exchanged amused glances. In all their years of climbing this trail, none had ever seen such a sweet reconciliation, brought about, of all things, by a simple cup of juice. "Boss, do your sweet bamboo juice and rice wine have any special effects?" "Yeah, are they really that potent?" Owen blinked. Nobody had ever asked him that before. Clearing his throat, he tried to explain as naturally as possible. "Well, the juice is pressed from young sweet bamboo shoots, with just a touch of sugar. It's perfect if you love something light and refreshing. It kind of lifts your spirits. As for the rice wine, let's just say it's popular with young men who need a little extra courage." He winced inwardly at his own vague words. Truth was, the wine's special effect only kicked in once you'd had enough to get properly drunk, and Owen had already seen a customer stumble back after just 2 small sips. That was weaker than a monarch serpent's tolerance, and yet somehow the young man hadn't even finished the bottle. Despite Owen's half-hearted sales pitch, curiosity got the better of the crowd. A fellow stepped forward and bought a bottle of juice. After the first cool sip, the exhaustion of the past few days seemed to melt away. His eyes lit up, and he let out a delighted laugh. "Wow, this is incredible! I feel so good!" Seeing his reaction, the onlookers' interest piqued. One by one, they began placing orders, passing bottles along and sharing in the unexpected pleasures of Owen's simple stall-side offerings. Owen's juice proved more popular than anyone had expected. By late morning, he'd sold out completely. Before noon, a representative from a major beverage company approached him, raving about the flavor and offering to buy his entire stock for mass production. They were convinced that a bottled version of Owen's juice would be a bestseller. Soon after, several supermarket chains and fruit distributors came knocking, each eager to turn Owen's creation into a commercial product. Despite the tempting offers, Owen politely declined every one. His secret ingredient, freshly harvested sweet bamboo shoots, simply couldn't be produced in the volumes required for factory bottling. Even if he soaked bamboo in water all day, it wouldn't yield enough juice. As for the fruit he grew in his greenhouse, it was earmarked entirely for his own cultivation experiments and wasn't available for sale either. Watching from a few stalls down, the neighboring plantation owner seethed with envy as crowds flocked to Owen's stand. But when he saw the elegant Gardevoir and the sleek Serpentis standing loyally by Owen's side, he could only shake his head in resignation. Who could compete with such gorgeous Pokémon guardians? And just like that, the morning slipped away in a flurry of delighted customers and empty bottles. After checking the handful of energy cubes stored in his pocket ball, Owen halted his stall setup, packed away his gear, tucked Serpentis and Sweet Bamboo back into their containment spheres, and headed toward the central plaza. Chapter 102. It was already noon, and the sun beat down so fiercely that even atop the hill where the little shed stood, the air felt stifling. By this time, the crowd around the other stalls had thinned noticeably. When Owen approached, Shufin looked up in surprise. "I didn't expect your plantation's produce to be such a hit," she said, nodding toward the handful of customers still clustered around his table. Owen laughed. "Maybe it's not just the fruits and vegetables. Pokémon attract people like nothing else." "Good point," Shufin agreed. "Give me a minute to stash these wine barrels, and then I'll take you to see the hive." She didn't pause for questions. Pulling out her storage orb, she lifted each barrel until they vanished with a soft pop. Owen watched her for a moment, then seized the opportunity to ask what had been on his mind. "You know, I've noticed that most of the other plantation owners on this hill barely make any sales, same as if they'd set up shop down in the market. Why do they bother coming all the way up here?" His question hung in the hot afternoon air, just as a new pair of customers arrived. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard strode past them, flanked by a towering, 3-meter-tall Pokémon. Muscles corded its body like hardened roots, and veins bulged beneath its skin, as though painted in relief. Owen and Shufin exchanged curious glances. Whatever answer she was about to give would have to wait a moment longer. The burly man quickly backtracked. "No offense, kid, but this Winetown gathering only runs 3 days each year. Sure, it brings in big crowds, but more importantly, it draws in industry buyers looking to stock up on honey wine and honey grapes. None of us wants to just unload a bunch of produce here at retail prices. We're all hoping to find a buyer who will place a large order straight from our orchards." Owen's eyes went wide. Of course, this event was as much about striking wholesale deals as it was about attracting tourists. The burly man, sensing his realization, leaned in with genuine curiosity. "Hey, you mentioned at your stall that you own the plantation in Wutong Town, right? Strange. I've never heard of you." The man was Owen's next-door neighbor at the market, selling a fruit called Phoenix Pear. Word was that feeding it regularly to battling Pokémon toughened and strengthened their hides. All morning, he'd watched enviously as a steady stream of customers flocked to Owen's stand, and now he understood why. Owen had managed to sell every variety of tree fruit he'd brought at premium prices, and even secured a lucrative contract with a well-known produce distributor. "I only took over my father's orchard this year," he explained with a modest shrug. The burly man behind the next stall nodded appreciatively and let out a low whistle. "That makes sense. To cultivate so many different fruits in under a year, and at your level, no less. Young breeders today really are something else." He leaned in, eyes bright with interest. "I noticed your Pokémon out there earlier. They looked formidable. Planning to join the defense match later?" Owen smiled. "Definitely. Even a single 30th of those honey grapes could produce enough wine to meet demand at the breeding house for months. I can't afford to pass up any bonus rewards." The big man laughed and clapped Owen on the shoulder. "Excellent. I'm looking forward to it. But be warned, my team packs serious power. We're gunning for first place this year." He straightened and called out to his partner. "Everyone loves a strong, muscular Pokémon, right? Check out Brawn here." On cue, a massive, rippling Pokémon flexed one impressive arm, drawing an admiring murmur from the crowd. Owen offered a polite, if slightly awkward smile and gave a respectful nod. As the tournament bells rang in the distance, both trainers readied themselves for the challenge ahead. When it came to raw power in Pokémon, the burly man always bragged about Lucario or Blaziken. Of course, some people go for gimmicks. Super strength, blazing roaring fizz, even exploding muscle mosquito, he continued with a laugh, clutching his barrel of supplies. Shufin set the barrel down and shot him a withering look. "Quit your boasting," she warned. "One of these kids will knock you off your high horse." The man scratched his bald head in mock outrage. "What do you mean? If it hadn't been for that champion trainer last year, I'd have won first place without breaking a sweat." He puffed out his chest. "But this year, the trophy's mine. Fen, be ready to harvest those honey grapes for me." With that, he swaggered off, leaving Shufin shaking her head. She turned to Owen. Come on, kid, let's go. Owen said nothing. He simply followed her down the hewn stone steps. Halfway down the mountainside, Shufin led him onto a narrow footpath that wound deeper into the forest. After a few minutes, it opened out onto a broad terrace, much like the one they'd just left. Only this time, riotous blooms of every color crowned its edge, their fragrances mingling on the mountain breeze. A soft breeze carried the sweet scent of honey and wildflowers as Owen and Shufin stepped into a sunlit clearing. At its center stood a large wooden house, surrounded by stacks of crates that seemed to hum with activity. Buzz! As they approached, dozens of combi emerged from the open boxes. Each Pokémon had a trio of tiny hexagonal bodies, pale yellow and glossy, each segment bearing a pair of translucent wings. When they fluttered, the air vibrated with a gentle cicada-like buzz. Though they shared one hive mind, the three little bee faces on each combi displayed individual expressions, curious, cautious, excited. Owen's eyes gleamed. 3 combi, exactly what he'd come all this way to find. In the wild, these loyal insects always served the hive's queen, and to secure their trust was no small feat. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At Shufin's gentle call, 2 combi broke from the swarm and drifted forward, their tiny faces blinking up at her in synchronized curiosity. Owen took a silent breath, ready to witness the next moment in his journey. Shufin set the wooden crate on the table and tapped its lid. Every year, estate owners come to me asking for 3 bees to handle pollination. The problem is, most fruit trees only bloom for a short time. Once the blossoms fall, those 3 bees often have nothing to do. Owen frowned. And idle bees? She nodded. Busy bees that suddenly find themselves unemployed get restless. They worry their king no longer needs them, and can even slip into a kind of depression. So whenever someone orders bees from me, I insist they plant extra flowers in their orchards, at least enough to keep the bees occupied. Owen gave a wry smile. He'd learned about bee behavior back in high school, but hearing it laid out this way still surprised him. Could Pokémon really get depressed from boredom? He glanced out at the sprawling gardens beyond the window. With that much space and so many flowering plants, his bees would never be idle. Besides, he had to admit, the 3 little creatures in the crate were irresistibly cute. Their round, honey-gold bodies, stacked like dripping combs, with tiny eyes and even tinier mouths. Shufin caught him studying the bees. One more thing, she said, lifting the crate's lid to let him get a closer look. These are 2 distinct types, male and female. Only the females can evolve into queens. If your garden is large enough and you plan to breed a queen, I can send you a female. If it's on the smaller side, I'll have to provide a male. Owen leaned in, watching one bee flutter its wings. A queen, huh? He smiled. All the more reason to expand my flower beds. They're all the same, Shufin said, watching the buzzing swarm. I've trained these bees myself, so they don't need a queen to produce honey. In fact, without a queen among them, they'll regard you as their king. Owen raised an eyebrow. Really? You can get honey without a queen bee? Shufin nodded. Yes, and on a larger scale, the results are astonishing. Each bee can yield up to 10 kilograms of honey a day when the garden is big enough. Now, tell me, how many flowering plants have you put in? Owen took a deep breath and turned to Rotom, who hovered at his shoulder. Rotom, bring up the photos of the garden and the images we took along the bluestone path. Chapter 103. Is this for real? Shufin stared in disbelief at the photo on her Pokégear screen. The image, taken by Owen's Rotom from high above, revealed an endless sea of blooms behind the cowshed, too vast for any ground-level shot. The same held true for the pictures flanking the bluestone path, petal-strewn curves stretching out of sight. Owen cleared his throat, feeling a flush of embarrassment. He'd planted the seeds on a whim, scattering them loosely inside a wooden frame. He never imagined that, once they all flowered, his little plot would turn into something so spectacular. You could easily support one combi cluster of 3 in a garden like this, Shufin said, finally looking up at him. But I'm not going to sell you dozens. I'll agree to 5 clusters at most. Owen's eyes brightened. 5 is perfect. After all, more honey-producing Pokémon meant more honey, something Owen was very much looking forward to. Combi were practically self-sufficient. They flitted from flower to flower, collected pollen, distilled nectar for their own energy, and only needed supplemental honey during rainstorms or in winter. No daily supervision required. All right, follow me, Shufin said. She led him around to a small wooden cottage at the edge of the yard. A simple wooden box sat just outside the door, a temporary holding pen for the new arrivals. Inside, beyond a sturdy wooden partition, was the hive's true home, ready to welcome Owen's 5 combi clusters. Owen pushed open the door to the wooden house and paused in wonder. Along both walls stretched rows of triangular shelves, each fitted with a little wooden chamber that looked just like a bird's nest. This, he realized, was where the 3B Pokémon had made their home. Pulling out his notebook, he quickly sketched the design. He'd recreate it in his cowshed once he returned. They strolled toward one of the nests, and just as Owen raised a question, Shufin motioned for him to stop. With a quiet nod, she slipped inside alone. Owen waited. 5 minutes later, Shufin reappeared, clutching 5 new Pokeballs. One by one, she handed them to him and whispered, "These are 5 of the latest bee Pokémon. When you release them at your plantation, they'll gather honey for you." "Thank you," Owen said, turning each Pokeball over in his hand. His curiosity flared, but he held back from opening them, at least until he was home. Instead, he closed his eyes and summoned his Evergreen Power, reaching out to feel the spark of life within. Warmth pulsed beneath his fingertips, and a contented smile curved his lips. Perfect. His plantation was about to welcome 5 more honey-gathering friends. Owen didn't forget the most important question. How much for the Tribes? Shufin glanced at her stock. Male Tribes are only 6,000 credits each, or 5 for 30,000. Owen nodded and had Rotom transfer the full 30,000 in an instant. It was a bargain. Raise a tribe properly, with good food and plenty of flowers, and it would supply honey forever, like a living apiary. By the way, Shufin went on, do you need a hive? I happen to have a spare. She pointed to a woven hive perched on a tripod beside her stall. Owen's eyes lit up. I'd love one. Consider it mine, she said with a warm smile. Leading him into a back room, she revealed row after row of hives. With her blessing, Owen picked out the largest, slipped it into his storage ball, and closed it with a soft click. Thanks, he said as he emerged. Don't mention it, Shufin replied. This afternoon's defense contest starts in the town square. If you want to rest beforehand, there's a hotel down at the foot of the mountain that takes guests. Got it, Owen said, nodding. He bowed politely, then called Gardevoir, who gently teleported him back to his own garden. Could he really spend more than 2 hours in Winetown? That time would be more than enough to get home, install the new beehive, and take a peek at the 3 bees he'd been waiting on. Owen pushed open the door to the cowshed. Immediately, the herd stopped munchin', and looked up in surprise. A moment later, they burst into a happy chorus of moos. Hey, everyone, he greeted, stepping inside. He glanced at the empty hay racks, and then at their bulging bellies. I left enough fresh grass to last all day, he thought, but it was barely noon, and they'd already polished off both the morning and afternoon feed. They really did a number on it, Owen said with a chuckle, circling the biggest cow. She nudged him eagerly, eyes shining as if to say, more, please. Seeing the rest of the herd crowd around him, lowing softly, he ruffled her forehead. All right, I get it. You're hungry. Give me a minute. He turned toward the feed room. Just hang tight. I'll be right back with more. Contented moos followed him down the aisle as he went to fetch the next batch of hay. Hold on a moment. Let me take care of this first, and then I'll feed you, Owen said, smiling at his 3 Miltank. For Miltank, eating a lot isn't a bad thing. Every ounce of energy they consume turns into fresh moo-moo milk, and with regular milking, the quality only gets better. Owen crouched beside the fence of the cowshed. By the way, he continued, once our new partner starts brewing honey, I can whip up different flavors. Honey-flavored milk, for instance. Moo-moo? Moo-moo. At the word honey, the Miltank's eyes lit up in unison. Moo-moo, they chorused, practically drooling at the thought of a sweet treat. Owen chuckled and shook his head at their excitement. He grabbed 2 sturdy planks and laid them across the top rail of the fence, then carefully set the beehive on the makeshift platform. From his belt, he produced 5 Pokeballs, and one by one, released 3 combi. Psst, psst, psst. The combi hovered uncertainly, scanning their surroundings before fixing Owen with curious stares. He offered a gentle grin and pointed past the cowshed toward a row of flowering hedges. See those blossoms over there? I need you to pollinate them so we can kick off our first honey harvest. With a cheerful psst, the three combi darted out of the shed, wings buzzing eagerly as they headed straight for the flowers. Below, the mill tank remained at the fence, swaying contentedly and lost in dreams of the sweet honey-flavored milk to come. Owen gave a nod toward the distant meadow. That's where you'll be gathering honey from now on. He stepped forward and slid open the hive's glass hatch, inviting the three young bees to take a look. Hesitant at first, they buzzed their way out, and the moment they saw the world beyond, their tiny eyes went wide with wonder. Buzz? One ventured, its voice soft and uncertain. Buzz! Another piped up, a note of excitement in its tone. Below them lay an endless carpet of blossoms, petals drifting on a gentle breeze and stretching as far as the eye could see. So many flowers. The meadow seemed to sparkle with promise, and the three bees could hardly wait to dive in. Chapter 104. Soft shafts of afternoon light filtered through the canopy, illuminating two flowering trees heavy with blossoms. The three bee drill hovered nearby, their multifaceted eyes glittering at the intoxicating scent. How is it? Do you like this spot? Owen asked from just behind them, voice low. One bee drill tilted its head toward him, sending a gentle thought through their psychic link. The flowers smell heavenly. Instantly, the other two echoed its gesture, turning their red eyes solemnly on Owen. In a silent show of loyalty, they swooped in a tight circle around him, then returned to the blooms. With delicate precision, their stingers probed each flower, extracting droplet after droplet of golden nectar. Owen felt the surge of their shared determination. If we don't hurry, we won't gather all this honey before nightfall. He exhaled slowly. Throughout his training career, he'd convinced himself that delegating farm chores to his Pokémon was part of their growth, and a way to avoid breaking a sweat himself. Yet watching these beedrill work so hard under the warm sun, his chest tightened with remorse. So many flowers, so much honey, and here he was, idling. A fresh resolve flickered within him. He could no longer stand on the sidelines. Stepping forward, Owen gripped his gardening tools, ready at last to contribute. Sure enough, Gardevoir fixed Owen with a telepathic stare so peculiar it made him squirm. On the surface, she might have seemed to be thinking, how can a trainer be so lazy? But in reality, Gardevoir's mind was running through a more generous line of reasoning. These three industrious combi should be a huge help to him, shouldn't they? She looked pleased. From her perspective, Owen was doing everything right. He'd been pouring his heart into expanding the breeding house, but he'd never overlooked his Pokemon's needs. Whenever a new Pokemon arrived, he took the time to learn their wishes, solve their problems, and even whip up delicious meals for them. That, to Gardevoir, was the mark of a truly dedicated trainer, so her strange expression was really one of fond admiration. Silence stretched for a moment before Owen cleared his throat and let out an awkward laugh. Ah, you're so useful, such hard-working combi. Gardevoir's telepathic codename, drifted into his mind with a single word, Gardeau. Owen understood it perfectly. Yes, those combi really are exceptionally diligent. Flushing, he turned back to his work. To help the little combi come and go more easily, he slid the glass partition aside just a bit and hurried to tidy up the breeding house. Owen returned to the kitchen just before 2 in the afternoon. He set a steaming basket of green dumplings on the counter, then rounded up all his Pokémon and fed them. Once they'd finished, he slipped down to the small reservoir behind the house to feed Melodic, whose gentle gaze followed every ripple. Finally, Owen called Gardevoir back to his side and used teleport to carry them both to Winetown. They arrived in the town's central square, a vast circular plaza paved with smooth stones. In its heart stood a gleaming marble arena, purpose-built by Shufin of the Honey Grape Garden for official Pokémon matches. Today, though, the arena was cordoned off. Only the trainers chosen for the upcoming defense battle and their Pokémon stood inside the enclosure, while a contingent of law enforcement officers and their Arcanine patrolled the perimeter. Outside the barriers, a restless crowd had already gathered. In this world, Pokémon battles drew roaring audiences hungry for excitement. But Owen remained composed. Where most trainers' hearts raced with adrenaline, his beat steadily on. He owed that calm to the presence of his Gardevoir, standing quietly at his side. With her ready, he felt certain of the outcome long before the battle would even begin. Owen stepped into the registration tent and let out a slow breath. All that remained was to enjoy the show. Signing up for the defense battle was remarkably straightforward. Present your professional trainer license. Normally, only trainers who had bested 4 gym leaders could claim one, but a special exception applied here. Any trainer whose Pokémon line boasted a 3-stage evolution in its final form was also welcome. Owen didn't technically have the license, but he did have a fully evolved Gardevoir. Inspector Schufen glanced at his badge, then at the graceful Pokémon at his side. She offered a polite smile, nodded, and gestured for him to proceed. Emerging into the vast contest square, Owen paused to take in the scene. Every trainer he passed released their best Pokémon, and without exception, they were all in their ultimate stages. A Pidgeot flapped by overhead, so much smaller than his own that it looked almost toy-like. By the next bench, a bulky, armored creature rolled out of its Pokeball. Owen squinted. "Apamon? Dublagas?" he murmured. They looked suspiciously like something from Team Rocket's shady experiments. Across the field, a trainer summoned an Alakazam, whose mind-bending psychic aura made Owen's skin tingle. He shook his head in awe. This was going to be a fierce competition. But with Gardevoir at his side, Owen felt ready for whatever this battlefield could throw at him. Owen let out a quiet sigh as he stepped into the arena. The scale of this competition was on par with some of the special provincial leagues he'd heard about. "Hey kid, you made it," boomed the burly trainer who'd cornered Owen at lunchtime. The same strange, crackling aura still clung to him. Owen offered a polite nod, but before he could speak, the trainer pressed on. "So have you given any thought to what we talked about? Interested in raising a fighting-type Pokémon?" With a flourish, the man pulled a Pokeball from his belt and clicked it open. In an instant, Machop sprang forth. Its small, rounded head perched above arms so packed with muscle you could see the ridges of its biceps and even a hint of abs beneath its skin. Owen's eyelid twitched involuntarily. "You really like those muscle-bound types, don't you?" Owen said, suppressing a smirk. "Sorry, I'll pass. I'm more into the fuzzy ones." The trainer pretended to wipe a tear from his eye. "That's too bad. But just wait. When you and your Gardevoir see what raw power he can unleash, you'll appreciate the beauty of pure muscle." Owen gripped his Pokeball, heart pounding. Did this guy really expect a level 41 Machop to take on his level 82 Gardevoir? Or are you trying to turn Gardevoir into some kind of muscle-bound Barbie? Sure, she can learn Ice Punch, Fire Punch, even Thunder Punch. The burly man was gearing up to argue with Owen when a sharp crack split the air overhead. Instinctively, everyone in the square looked up. A streak of yellow light tore through the sky, hurtling past Winetown's rooftops. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd. Any Pokémon moving that fast had to be extraordinarily powerful. If it had decided to land here, their defense today would be ruined. Owen froze for a moment. That energy, he knew it. "Phew," the big man murmured beside him. "Looks like just another passing trainer. You can't get unlucky twice. Last year we had a king. This year can't be another one." But before anyone could fully relax, the crack of energy split the sky again. That golden figure was diving straight toward the town square. Chapter 105. A soft woo echoed through the clearing, and Owen looked up in surprise. Hovering before him was a Dragonite, its sleek golden-orange body gleaming in the sun, that familiar round face brimming with curiosity. "Dragonite?" Owen couldn't hide his astonishment. "I thought you left with Mewtwo ages ago. What are you doing here?" The Dragonite flapped its wings and landed lightly on the grass, letting out another excited woo. Then, in its own way, it began to explain. Apparently, Mewtwo had told it to take some time off, to explore the world on its own, and that Owen didn't need to deliver any more messages for now. So Dragonite set off, only to find itself constantly longing for the taste of that last energy cube. It had made a stop at Dragonite Island, but every moment away just sharpened its craving. Why had it allowed Mewtwo to claim the final cube? If only it had eaten it sooner, if only it had tried harder to snatch it back. The more it brooded, the angrier it became, but it knew it could never best Mewtwo in a fight. Resigned to its mistake, it fixated on one goal: reclaim that cube. Consumed by that obsession, Dragonite flew straight back to the Donghua Alliance gates, determined to find Owen and set things right. Owen listened, nodding as he pieced together the story. He met the Pokemon's eager gaze and asked, "Let me guess, you came all this way for the energy cube?" Owen shifted uneasily, glancing down the crowded arena. "I'm not at home right now," he admitted, "and I don't have any food on me." Dragonite let out a puzzled, "Woo?" but only for a moment. Having served as Mewtwo's courier for so long, its understanding of the human world was nearly on par with Gardevoir's. In a single sweep of its gaze, it took in banners, cheering crowds, and trainers calling out commands. Clearly, a Pokémon tournament was underway. With renewed determination, Dragonite turned to Owen, narrowed its golden eyes, and flexed its massive claws. A thin arc of light gleamed off the talons as it issued a thunderous challenge. "Woo! I want to battle." Owen's breath caught. "You mean, you want me to catch you, then enter the tournament and fight on my behalf?" Dragonite responded with an eager nod and a soft hiss of anticipation. Owen's mind raced. A first-generation pseudo-legendary Pokémon was an extraordinary prize, and more than that, an invaluable ally. Dragonite's rain dance could irrigate Melodic's farm. Its broad, smooth belly looked like the world's comfiest resting spot, and its combination of strength and flight made it ideal for heavy lifting or construction projects. If he accepted its challenge, he wouldn't just win a battle. He'd gain a partner capable of changing everything. Taking a deep breath, Owen dropped his Pokeball and prepared to make Dragonite his. Owen paused at the edge of the stream, running through possibilities in his mind. If Dragonite had been here last time, they widened the water diversion channel. It could have helped Gardevoir manage the heavy flow. And with the road due for repairs in September, repairs that could cost a small fortune, having Dragonite haul materials would save him a bundle in transport fees. Once the gym was built too, Dragonite could serve as a powerful battler. His thoughts raced through each benefit when a hesitation stopped him cold. What about Mewtwo? He'd heard rumors that it could assume human form. Would it be angry if he caught another Pokémon here? Owen shook his head and sighed. He was overthinking again. If Mewtwo took offense, he'd just make it a few extra meals to apologize. No problem. With renewed confidence, he pulled a Pokeball from his belt and held it out in front of him. "All right, buddy, let's go." Dragonite didn't hesitate. It leaned down, nudged the sphere with its snout, and let out an eager, "Woo!" A few soft dings later, the crimson and white orb fell still in Owen's palm. Owen exhaled in relief and felt the familiar thrill of victory rise in his chest. He toyed with the idea of delivering a classic trainer's speech, messing about friendship and teamwork, but glanced around at the curious onlookers and decided against it. Not today. Instead, he simply smiled, pocketed the Pokeball, and moved on. If taming the 3 Beedrill was part of the plan, then Dragonite was an unexpected bonus. After finishing his conversation with Dragonite, Owen glanced at his watch. It was almost 2:30, time for his defense match to begin. Yet the challenger still stood there, frozen. Owen couldn't help but urge him, "Hey, the match is about to start. Aren't you going over?" "Match?" The man blinked, as if roused from a trance, and stared at Owen in disbelief. What had he just seen? A colossal Dragonite, clearly more powerful than any of his own Pokémon, soar down, exchange pleasantries with a boy, then declare itself Owen's partner, and promise to help him win the championship? Judging by that speed, it was faster than last year's champion trainer's Noivern. No. Was there even any suspense left in this battle? The challenger stood wordless, utterly dazed. He finally managed. Owen realized that Dragonite's dramatic arrival had telegraphed the outcome to everyone watching. He looked around and saw every pair of eyes fixed on him. The look of shock on every face and the sudden stunned silence said it all. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. "Dragonite? That kid's got a Dragonite!" "Unbelievable. Have we even seen a Dragonite this year? I think our defending champion just announced himself." Owen massaged his temples. He'd already promised Strong Chicken and Monarch a match against one another, with Sweet Bamboo and Ball Sea Lion cheering from the sidelines. But now he'd committed to using Dragonite in this round, so there was no way he could keep his other Pokémon in reserve. He'd need someone else to look after them. With a reluctant sigh, he recalled Sweet Bamboo and Ball Sea Lion, then released them to Gardevoir's care. Sweet Bamboo perched trustingly on Gardevoir's shoulder. Ball Sea Lion nudged forward, whimpering softly. Gardevoir, Owen said, meeting his partner's serene gaze, please watch over them. I'm going into the ring. Gardevoir, came the cheerful reply. Gardevoir gave a gentle nod. It had been eager to help Owen secure first place, but glancing at the opposing trainers' rosters, it was clear the path to victory was already his. There was simply no need for any extra support. As the bell rang to signal the start of the defense round, the other trainers hesitated at the edge of the ring, glancing nervously at Owen's Dragonite. Their uncertainty spoke louder than words. They were waiting for him to make the first move. Owen stepped onto the battle ring with a small measure of uncertainty. He glanced down at the assembled challengers in the stands, and then released his 3 Pokémon in succession, Dragonite, Charizard, and Brachydios. Brachydios landed with a flourish, chest puffed out in eager confidence. It let out a triumphant roar, as though daring any opponent to step forward, but no one moved. The giant beast waited, stamping the ground, its tail thundering in anticipation, yet still no challenger appeared. Growing impatient, Brachydios glanced around. Then it caught sight of a dark shape stretching across the arena floor. Something immense was standing behind it. Turning its head, the hulking silhouette resolved itself into a Pokémon far larger than Brachydios, towering, majestic, radiating power that made even a battle-hardened monster pause. Charizard, standing beside Owen, swallowed hard. It edged closer to its trainer and gave Owen's pant leg a gentle tug. "Owen?" it seemed to ask, concern flickering in its eyes. Owen frowned, startled. "Char?" he replied softly. Charizard pointed hesitantly at the towering figure half hidden in shadow, as if asking, "Is that our opponent?" Owen's lips curved into a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "That's Dragonite, one of our own. No one's facing him today." Reassured, Charizard relaxed its tension, and Brachydios let out a relieved snort. Whatever challenge lay ahead, Owen and his team would face it together. Chapter 106. Dragonite loomed on the battlefield like an immovable fortress, but a lone trainer nonetheless strode onto the stage and formally challenged it. As reigning champion, Owen had no choice but to accept. Challengers must defeat 3 of the champion's Pokémon in succession, and champions are obliged to field all 3 Pokémon in order. It was a small concession, knowing one's opponent in advance, but it gave any challenger the chance to plan around the champion's strengths. Owen sighed and recalled his Blaziken, nicknamed Strong Chicken. It was a pity its match had gone up in smoke before it even started. The challenger himself looked barely more than 23 or 24, fresh out of college, by the look of him, full of boundless energy. Owen tapped the Pokédex for details on his first Pokémon. Venusaur, male, characteristic, lush growth, ability, overgrow, hidden ability, chlorophyll, individual values, level 37 to 39, moves, vine whip, leech seed, grassy terrain, toxic, substitute, protect. A bright, resilient setup, terrain control to hamper Dragonite, leech seed and toxic to whittle it down, with substitute and protect for stalling. Owen smiled to himself. He already had a counter-strategy forming in his mind. Owen squared his shoulders and spoke quietly to Dragonite. "Be gentle, okay? Just make sure they can't fight back." He'd glanced at Dragonite's status panel and memorized its moves, but he'd never actually given it a command before, didn't want to risk spooking it. Today, he decided, Dragonite would trust its own instincts. Before the battle began, Owen looked down at Gardevoir. "And you, keep an eye on the field. If anything goes wrong, step in." Gardevoir met his gaze and nodded. Owen felt its gentle voice in his mind. "Don't worry, I've got this." A warmth spread through him. Since Gardevoir had arrived on the estate, he'd felt safer than ever with it by his side. Unnoticed by Owen, Dragonite heard his orders a little differently. The great drake tilted its head and let out a low rumble, curious, puzzled. "Huh?" it seemed to say, glancing at the lone Bulbasaur waiting on the opposite side of the arena. Then it swept its gaze across the other trainers' big Pokémon. Owen's words registered in one clear directive: defeat every opponent. With a crackling cheer, Dragonite flared its wings, filling the field with a gust of wind. It reared back on its hind legs and roared. "All right, let's win this!" Owen's Dragonite and the challenger's Bulbasaur faced off across the rocky arena. The boy opposite Owen could barely contain his excitement. "Brother," he cried, leaning forward. At the very start of the match, he barked out an order. Bulbasaur, grassy terrain. Immediately, lush green grass burst up from the stones, carpeting the battlefield in verdant blades. A broad grin split the boy's face. Great job. Now use poison powder. He never got to finish. In a heartbeat, Dragonite's claws ignited with roaring flames as it dove straight down like a blazing meteor. The attack hit the ground with explosive force, Flame Fist, incinerating the new grass in a flash of sparks. Then, as the scorched earth still smoked, Dragonite rocketed into the sky. Its form was a blur, invisible ripples of air trailing behind it. Before anyone could react, it reappeared beside Bulbasaur. This time its tail glowed with raw power, and with astonishing speed, the dragon smacked the little Pokémon, Dragon Tail, sending a sharp crack echoing through the arena. Bulbasaur squinted up at Owen's Dragonite, clearly dazed. The triumphant look on the boy's face fell away, replaced by wide-eyed shock. He'd banked on grassy terrain, setting him up to poison powder his opponent, and then guard with Protect, but he hadn't even managed to raise a shield before Owen's Dragonite finished him off. Owen sank into the edge of the raised battle platform and watched the last challenger limp off, Bulbasaur in tow. He could hear their muttered disbelief echoing through the small arena. That Dragonite, it's too powerful. Could a boy that young really be a superstar trainer? The defeated student turned away, shoulders slumped, and called Bulbasaur back into its Pokeball. Woo-woo, it protested softly. Owen nodded once and let Dragonite settle back on all fours. The orange-winged Pokémon paused, then swept its deep blue eyes over the dozen trainers lined up below. With a deliberate slowness, it flexed a massive dragon claw and arched its neck in a proud, almost defiant pose. Owen blinked. In his mind, Dragonite had always seemed gentle, a trusty courier, never one for theatrics. When had it grown so bold? The trainers in the stands bristled. One jutted a finger toward the stage. What's with that haughty look? You can't convince me that thing can beat all our Pokémon. Bring it on, Dragonite, another shouted. An hour later, only 5 trainers remained. Owen's Dragonite looked fresh as ever, its wings unruffled, its scales glinting under the overhead lights. Every challenger so far had fallen in 2 hits or fewer. A Galarian Mr. Mime had tried to stall with mist and light screen, but a single searing flamethrower blast sent it sprawling. Silence spread through the crowd. No one dared step onto the stage now. Owen watched them, heart steady, fingers brushing the Pokeball at his belt. Whatever came next, he and Dragonite were more than ready. Owen watched Dragonite loom over the battlefield, its wings folded casually as if it were savoring a long-overdue triumph. The dragon's eyes glittered with a fierce pride, perhaps relief, after so many battles alongside Mewtwo had left it doubting its own power. Owen didn't know why Dragonite felt this surge of confidence now, but the sight filled him with a strange thrill. Below the stage, the challenger trainers stood in stunned silence, shaking their heads in disbelief. Owen felt a twinge of pity for them. He'd replayed this match in his mind a dozen times, imagining every twist. First, Brutebringer would grind down the opposing lead, then King Serpent would turn the tide against the second Pokémon, and finally Gardevoir would close it out. Yet none of that happened. Instead, Dragonite had dived from the sky, roaring with exhilaration, and swept through each opponent in a single breathtaking onslaught. When the gym owner, Shufen, stepped forward to announce the result, Owen hesitated only a moment before climbing the steps, Dragonite's Pokeball in his left hand and Gardevoir's in his right. His cheeks burned as he offered a sheepish bow. Sorry, I guess I ended the defense challenge a bit early. To his surprise, Shufen threw back her head and laughed, a warm, joyful sound that made Owen's tension melt away. She straightened her uniform, her dark hair swaying as she smiled at him. No, Owen, she said, shaking her head in amazement. I should be thanking you. I've run this gym's defense matches for years, and never have they drawn a crowd, or such excitement. No one's ever brought a team strong enough to truly challenge us. Tonight, you changed all that. Owen met her gaze and felt a surge of pride, not just for himself, but for Dragonite, whose powerful spirit had carried the day. As the spectators cheered, he realized this was only the beginning of an adventure far greater than any match result could show. Owen settled back in his chair, watching Shufen's eyes sparkle with enthusiasm. With you here, she said, I have no doubt we'll see even stronger trainers at next year's defense matches. Is that so? Owen asked, surprised by her confidence. Shufin nodded, letting out a soft sigh. Honestly, I've organized these orchard defenses for years now, and I've never encountered a plantation owner with a Pokémon as formidable as yours. She paused, then offered, So, about the honey grapes this season, would you prefer that we sell your 1/30th share and give you the proceeds, or that you take that same portion of grapes fresh from the vine? Owen flushed slightly at the praise. After all, it wasn't truly his talent that had trained Dragonite to be so reliable in defense. Still, when it came to honey grapes, he preferred the fresher option. I'd like to have them picked for me, please, he said. I want to taste them straight off the plants, not sold. Shufin smiled. Of course. Just so you know, though, if you choose to have them harvested, there'll be labor costs to cover. If you take the equivalent in cash, there's no harvesting fee. That's fine, Owen replied readily. An orchard spanning over 100 acres produced a staggering amount of honey grapes. Even just 1/30th of the crop was more than enough to justify hiring pickers. He waved her concern away. I'm happy to pay for the harvest. Fresh grapes are worth it. Shufin nodded. You can come by in 3 days to pick up your honey grapes. Just remember, if you can't store them in a cool place, they must go into the wine vats within 10 days, or they'll spoil. Got it. Brewing wine was exactly why Owen had come. He leaned forward, hopeful. Speaking of which, Uncle Moo mentioned you keep Pokémon like Hoo-Hoo here to help with the process. Is that true? A gentle smile played on Shufin's lips, but her next words froze Owen's excitement. Of course you'd use Hoo-Hoo for winemaking, but from the way you're asking, I take it you want to raise some yourself? Owen nodded. Well, she continued, her tone apologetic, I'm afraid I don't have many Hoo-Hoo left. They've been my loyal partners in the cellar for years, and I depend on every one of them. Chapter 107. Dusk settled over the valley as an orange shape tore across the sky like a missile. Moments later, it swept in for a landing on a narrow path bordered by blossoming flowers. Woohoo! In under 10 minutes, Owen had already tasted the pure thrill of flight on Dragonite's back. No wonder Mewtwo entrusted its messages to this Pokémon. Its speed was incredible. Owen felt the wind roar in his ears and the world beneath blur into streaks of green and gold. He remembered the first time he'd taken to the air on his newly evolved Pidgeot and thought that was exhilarating, until now. Clearly, no flying Pokémon could rival Dragonite. Perched high among the pines, 2 Pidgey fluttered into a panic at the sudden appearance of the dragon. They hopped from branch to branch, calling out anxiously, until they recognized Owen and relaxed once more. Pidgey? Dragonite planted its massive feet on the soft earth and lowered its head, eyes sweeping over the riot of blooms lining the path. Owen stepped down beside it, brushing a stray petal from his sleeve. I planted these flowers a little while ago, he explained with a smile. Dragonite let out a low, approving rumble as it sniffed the fragrant air, another small success on Owen's journey. Owen raised his hand, and his 2 Pidgeots swooped down and settled beside him. He glanced at the breeding house's locked door. Qin Shu must have already finished her shift. He tapped the lock, swung the door open, and stepped inside. A cluster of tiny frost fairies, who'd been leaning boredly against the counter, looked up at him. The moment their eyes met his, their faces lit up and they burst into excited cheers. Owen! Our little cakes are all sold out! Sold out! He's back! Owen's back! Their bright smiles melted away every ounce of Owen's fatigue. He strode forward, reaching out to lift one of the frost fairies for a closer look, when suddenly they all scattered in panic, diving into Owen's shadow. Owen, Owen, they squeaked, their voices trembling. It's so big. A monster. Owen frowned in confusion and turned around. There, filling the doorway, stood a Dragonite, nearly 3 meters tall, its broad shoulders brushing the frame of the 2-meter-high door. The dragon stared at the cramped threshold, as if weighing whether it could squeeze through without wrecking the place. Dragonite? Owen said, blinking. Dragonite, you go back into your Pokeball first. Owen offered the device to the dragon, whose innocent eyes seemed to plead with him. With a gentle press of the button, Dragonite disappeared in a swirl of light. He turned to the Frost Milk Fairy, its tiny wings shimmering. Don't worry, you two are our new partners now, just like King Serpent. Mentioning King Serpent gave Owen an instant headache. Ever since its evolution, the giant serpent had stretched to nearly 5 meters long. The treehouse that once felt roomy was now hopelessly cramped, and Serpent flat out refused to live in a Pokeball. He'd have to find or build a lair big enough for it, and sooner or later, figure out what kind of environment Dragonite preferred too. Owen rubbed his neck, one problem at a time. Then the strawberry-headed frost fairy tapped his hand and produced a small slip of parchment from the bottom of its bowl. It chirped, "Schwang, schwang," twice, spinning around excitedly. Owen unfolded the note. A customer wanted to order a large cake. "Perfect timing," he murmured, tucking the order into his pocket. With 2 new Pokémon partners and King Serpent to house, things were only just getting interesting. Owen blinked in surprise. "Is someone here to order a birthday cake?" The frost fairies all nodded eagerly, chirping, "Schwang, schwang!" "Yes, yes!" One of them pushed a small slip of paper toward him. Owen smoothed it out and read, "Dear Brother Owen, on September 15th, I captured a unicorn beetle. It's been by my side through the hardest times. I've heard your baking is amazing, so could you please make a big cake that it will love? Contact 1." Owen tapped his chin thoughtful. "Lie. If that unicorn beetle was caught last year, by now it must have evolved into a giant bee. And what do bees love most? Honey. A cake layered with whipped cream and drizzled with honey should be perfect." He looked up, smiling. "All right, I'll get right on it." The fairies clapped their tiny hands in delight. "Frost! Wonderful." One fluttered forward and waved. "Frost, now carry us home, please." Since their shift was over, there was nothing to keep them at the counter. With giggles like tinkling icicles, they gathered themselves, ready to head back, confident that Owen would create the perfect honeyed cake for their loyal companion. Previously, they'd simply waited here for Owen to return home, nothing more. All right. Owen carefully carried each Pokémon to its room in turn, settled them into their individual bowls, and fed them a hearty helping of tree fruit salad. Then he headed for the plantation out back, intending to release all his Pokémon into the garden. But before he could reach the gate, 2 Combee zipped up to him. "Buzz!" They circled Owen excitedly, buzzing insistently, and led him straight to the hive entrance. When Owen peered inside, his eyes went wide. What had been an empty hive was now packed solid with golden honey, a massive block that had to weigh at least 30 or 40 kilograms. They'd only started harvesting at noon. Just a few hours of work, and they'd produced this much? Owen reached into his storage pouch and pulled out a small knife. Turning to the 2 Combee, he asked with a grin, "You really made this much honey so fast? Mind if I take some?" The Combee's tiny eyes curved into happy slits. "Buzz!" they chorused, vibrating their wings in delight at his praise. Owen carefully sliced a piece of honeycomb from the hive. The honey glowed like liquid gold, its threads stretching sticky and unbroken between his knife and the comb. He held it up, noting 2 distinct colors. The darker amber on the left was B+ sweet honey, a brew by 3 Combee from rare sweet honey blossoms, prized for its extra potency in restoring qi and sweetening the body, and the ultimate lure for bug-type Pokémon. The paler section on the right was B-level flower honey, gathered by the same 3 Combee from ordinary blooms. Though milder, it still replenished qi, strengthened the core, and made a fine ingredient. "Buzz!" The 3 Combee flitted around him, wings beating in unison. They wanted more honey, fast. Owen chuckled softly. All right, why are you so impatient today?" He carefully placed the comb on a clean leaf and readied his knife for another harvest. The little bees danced around him, eager to get back to work. Chapter 108, Buzz? The 3 bees looked up at Owen with puzzled expressions, antennae quivering. What did he mean by curl? There were plenty of blossoms here, and surely it made more sense to keep gathering nectar for their king. Owen, rubbing his tired eyes, found himself admiring their unwavering dedication. "Curl up," he called again, clapping his hands. This time, after a moment's hesitation, each bee rolled itself into a neat, compact spiral. Satisfied, Owen reached into his pack and pulled out a small glass bottle of Moo Moo milk. He poured the creamy milk and the fresh honey he'd collected into a crystal storage orb, then snapped it shut with a soft click. The bees, appeased by the exchange, buzzed off once more to the flowers, their wings humming in unison. Feeling a second wind, Owen walked through the garden to the training grounds at its edge. He pressed the first Pokeball on his belt and tossed it lightly into the air. In a burst of light, Strongo, the bulky chicken-like Pokémon, landed before him. Strongo glanced around nervously. Across the clearing, Sweet Bamboo's sleek, grass-type and Ball, the sea lion Pokémon, stood ready, radiating confidence. Strongo's crest drooped. There was no hiding it. These opponents looked tough. Yet the proud bird held its ground, determined to prove itself. It squared its shoulders and promptly let out 2 loud gurgles as its stomach rumbled. Strongo gave Owen a sheepish look. Owen couldn't help but laugh and ruffle the bird's feathers. "Don't worry, buddy. We'll grab a quick snack before the match." Relief washed over Strongo's face as they both readied for the battles ahead. Owen paused at the soft scuffling from beyond the training ring. A sudden look of understanding crossed his face. "Hold on. Everyone's hungry, right? I'll get dinner ready right away." "Cha!" Strong Chicken cheered, hopping excitedly on its talons. One by one, the others emerged. Ball Sea Lion trudged in, shoulders slumped with fatigue, and Sweet Bamboo drifted forward to Gardevoir's side, its leafy fronds trembling. All of them looked exhausted and very hungry. Above them, Dragonite settled back down, its massive wings folding neatly. The scorched marks on the ground around the ring testified to its latest demonstration of power. No other Pokémon dared challenge those crushing blows again. Owen surveyed the group and realized he'd never properly introduced Dragonite. Bending at the waist, he scooped Sweet Bamboo, whose actual name was Tiantian, into his arms. He gave the little creature a gentle pat. "By the way, this is Tiantian, our newest partner. He'll be staying with us for a while, or at least until Mewtwo decides to show up and reclaim Dragonite." He straightened, still cradling Tiantian. "All right, everyone, let's eat." Owen waved his hand, and his Gardevoir immediately used telekinesis to lift Melodic from the reservoir. As the graceful water type landed on the bank, Owen unpacked a collapsible iron grill and plate, swiftly assembling them on the open-air barbecue terrace. Tonight's dinner would be cooked right here. He'd kept the menu simple: energy cubes for his Pokémon, with honey-fried eggs, honey fruit salad, and honey-glazed spare ribs as treats. All the ingredients were stored in his portable refrigerator, a setup that once had him running back and forth to the Want supermarket until manager Chi Heng arranged home delivery. Now Owen simply dispatched his Pidgeot courier every morning to collect fresh supplies. "Blaziken," Owen called, "let's work on your flame temperature control. I need a steady, even heat for those eggs." The fire type inhaled deeply and exhaled a controlled jet of flame, warming the grill plate to a perfect sizzle. Owen cracked eggs onto its surface. The whites bubbled and crisped as he drizzled a little honey over them. At the reservoir's edge, Alolan Vulpix padded closer, her icy blue fur gleaming in the evening light. She let out a soft "ooh" of curiosity as she watched Dragonite emerge beside Melodic, water cascading off its broad, rounded belly. Unlike Tianju and Chukyu, the sea lion, who barely spared the dragon Pokémon a glance, Vulpix was utterly transfixed by Dragonite's plump silhouette. The ice Vulpix that had grown up alongside Owen was bold and unflappable, perhaps a result of never having known real hardship. So when it faced the towering Dragonite, it showed no fear. Instead, it cocked its head, let out a little yip-yip, and, strangely compelled, asked, "Could you lie down for a moment?" Dragonite blinked in surprise. It didn't understand what the tiny fox wanted, but since Vulpix was the first Pokémon on the estate to speak to it so politely, it gently lowered itself onto the grass. The massive form stretched out across the clearing. Vulpix's eyes gleamed. With a quick hop, it landed on Dragonite's broad belly, pressed in its claws to test the softness, and then began to bounce gleefully. "Yip yip, this is so comfortable." Dragonite watched the little Vulpix with quiet curiosity, drifting into thoughtful silence. Dragonite despised ice and fairy-type Pokémon, but he couldn't bring himself to hate the little Alolan Vulpix curled up on his belly. Somehow, the fox reminded him of himself as a baby Dratini, when the elder Dragonair used to gush over how adorable he looked. Funny to think that now he was the big, powerful Dragonite, and yet here he was, doting on this tiny creature. He lifted his head, squinting affectionately at the soft white Vulpix. "Tiantian," he rumbled gently. At the same moment, the little friend scrambling after Gardevoir, a soft-furred, bright-eyed rodent Pokémon called Tianzuju, looked on with wide, hopeful eyes. Gardevoir bent down, voice as quiet as a breeze. "Garv? Want to play?" Tianzuju's whiskers trembled, and she let out a high, eager squeak. "Tian? Yes, please." Gardevoir's lips curved in a tender smile. With a ripple of telekinetic energy, he scooped Tianzuju into a hovering bubble of force and gently placed her on Dragonite's ample belly. No sooner had Tianzuju landed than Vulpix reached out with her tiny paws and hugged her tight. The two of them bounced joyfully on Dragonite's soft underbelly, delighted squeaks and nervous chirps echoing around the cavern. Dragonite watched them play, his great tail swishing in contentment. There was no place he'd rather be. Chapter 109. Owen stood by the campfire frying eggs, and he glanced over at Dragonite with a satisfied smile. Just as he'd imagined, the gentle giant hovered quietly nearby, its calmer demeanor a perfect contrast to his other, more exuberant Pokémon. After cracking and cooking 10 more eggs and transferring them onto a plate, he felt the heat of the iron skillet shift beneath his spatula. He looked over at Charizard, who was crouched beside the fire, steam curling from its flaring nostrils and drool pooling at the corners of its mouth. Undoubtedly, its hunger was pushing it to breathe a hotter, more intense flame. Owen tapped the side of the skillet. "All right, Charizard, let's work on controlling that fire. If you can keep your flames steady under pressure, your skill with fire-type moves will improve a lot." Charizard snorted, a thin wisp of flame flickering from its maw. It didn't respond, but Owen could practically hear it thinking. Here we go again with the trainer's long lectures. Owen grinned and shifted tactics. "Look, if you can't regulate your heat properly, these eggs won't turn out tasty, and you know what that means. If they taste bad, I'll just give them all to Dragonite." That made Charizard's eyes go wide. "Whoa, no way!" It leapt into action, tightening control over the fire coiling in its belly. The flickering flame settled into a steady, manageable glow beneath the skillet. "Perfect," Owen said, flipping an egg with a practiced flick of his wrist. "That's exactly it. Keep it consistent, and you'll be cooking. Battling, like a pro in no time." Charizard huffed, a small plume of smoky air escaping its lips, and settled back into a more relaxed pose. Owen resumed cooking, confident his lesson in flame control was already taking hold. Owen let out a quiet chuckle, watching Strong Chicken standing there, clearly taken in by his trick. On the iron griddle before him, one side of an egg hissed gently in the hot oil. He drizzled a touch of honey and a sprinkle of seasoning onto the still slick surface, then flipped it over. At the same time, he turned the pork ribs sizzling on the opposite side of the plate. With the number of Pokémon he now cared for, cooking 100 eggs at once wouldn't even be a stretch. He paused, thinking of his Pidgeots, 20 in all, and immediately glanced up at the tall pine nearby. Counting quickly, he let out a relieved breath when he spotted Dream perched among the branches. His prized Pidgeot hadn't flown off after all. After frying 10 eggs, Owen tapped his Pokégear to inspect them more closely. Grade honey fried egg. Description: a fried egg glazed with sweet honey. Effect 1: instantly fills a Pokémon with happiness upon eating. Effect 2: regular use gradually increases a Pokémon's energy absorption rate. Owen watched the digestion boost take effect on Strong Chicken and allowed himself a satisfied nod. If the bird could break down its food more quickly, it would evolve that much sooner. With that goal in mind, he stepped out into the garden, Strong Chicken trilling curiously at his heels. In the herb patch, Owen gathered a handful of mint leaves and crushed them into a frothy paste, then transferred the mixture to a small bowl by his side. Back in the kitchen, he drizzled honey into a hot pan and began cracking eggs into the golden glaze. Every few eggs, he scooped in a spoonful of mint paste, stirring it gently as the eggs sizzled. Within 10 minutes, he had produced 100 perfectly browned, honey-fried eggs, their sweet, minty aroma filling the room. Owen tapped his finger against the countertop and checked the recipe details that appeared beside the dish. A+ grade honey-fried eggs, prepared with sweet honey and fresh mint for a comforting, aromatic flavor. Cooking Effect 1: instantly heightens a Pokémon's happiness. Cooking Effect 2: with regular feeding, accelerates a Pokémon's energy absorption. Special feature: emits a scent irresistible to cat-type Pokémon. A broad grin spread across Owen's face. With this powerful diss, H ready, Strong Chicken's happiness and its next evolutionary surge were all but guaranteed. Owen smiled to himself as he surveyed the little patch of mint before him. It had been superior, drunk on overripe berries, that first sowed these seeds one evening. Knowing he needed the mint to mature before Menghuan's departure, Owen had drenched the soil in a high-grade Jin Kella elixir. No wonder the leaves were already bursting with life. "Hey, you lot!" Owen called to the Pokémon frolicking at the edge of the clearing. "Come on over and try this mint. Time to quit playing and start sampling." He glanced up into the pine above him, where Pidgeot lounged on a sturdy branch. "And you, Pidgeot, down here!" Pidgeot ruffled its feathers lazily. It had accompanied Owen on their morning stroll, but found the human's antics less than thrilling. Then, from the corner of its eye, it spotted a graceful dragonite drifting between the trees, the same kind of aura Pidgeot knew well. Intrigue sparkled in its amber eyes. Tonight, it decided it would finish this snack and slip away quietly. Later, when Owen least expected it, Pidgeot would transform, reveal its true form, and watch that human's jaw drop. Just imagining that priceless expression made Pidgeot's feathers tremble with excitement. "Pidgeot," Owen called again, oblivious to the plot unfolding overhead. But Pidgeot was already lost in its own mischievous daydream. Owen sniffed the air, puzzled by the rich, irresistible aroma drifting up from below. It grew stronger by the second, until he could almost taste it. Down beneath the pine boughs, a group of Pidgeys fluttered restlessly, peering at a lone skillet where someone was frying eggs. Unable to resist any longer, one bold Pidgey flitted down to investigate. A pair of trainers beckoned it closer and offered a small plate piled with freshly cooked eggs. Most were the usual pale yellow, but one egg stood out, its edges tinged a faint green. Curious, the Pidgey tilted its head and gave that strange egg a careful sniff. The scent was heavenly. With a soft, questioning chirp, the bird scooped the green-tinged egg into its beak, but then it froze. Its entire body quivered with excitement. It twisted back and forth, beating its wings in an awkward little dance. The other Pidgeys paused their pecking and stared. Finally, a proud Pidgeot swooped down and tapped the trembling Pidgey with a wing. The newcomer blinked, still clutching the fragrant egg, as if to say, "What's wrong? Don't you like it?" Then it let out a hopeful, chirping trill, inviting the others to share in its discovery. "Give it to me," Owen demanded, holding out his hand. Dream froze, then snatched the egg back as if guarding her treasure. "Bibi, no, don't take it." With a quick swipe of her claws, she cracked the shell and tore it open. Chunks of warm yolk and white fell into her beak, and she ate with pure delight, eyes half closed in bliss. But once the euphoria faded, she shifted uneasily, pacing in small circles. "Tomorrow? Should I leave then? Or the day after?" Owen watched her with amusement, about to call out, when a system chime interrupted his thoughts. "Congratulations! You have raised Dream's joy level from 10% to 70%. Rewards granted: 10 bags of special-grade Jin Kela, 3 special-grade magical candies, 1 Dream Eyelash, contains Dream's genes, suitable for culinary or alchemical use." Owen blinked in surprise, a smile tugging at his lips. Dream glanced at him curiously, her earlier anxiety forgotten, for now. Chapter 110. Owen had set up his system to announce any time he earned a special reward. So when the notification popped up, Dreamy Eyelashes cooked, he couldn't help but blink in confusion. Dreamy Eyelashes? Cooked? The two phrases made no sense together. Shrugging, he sent the alert off to the system's storage for later investigation. Turning back to the stove, Owen refocused on the pork chops sizzling before him. It struck him that he already had a treasure trove of unexamined rewards stored away. Hundreds of skill discs he'd meant to sort by which Pokémon could learn them, plus rare items like the Holy Feather, the Silver Feather, the Calming Bell, and even a bent spoon. He really needed to carve out some time to pull everything out and see what he'd been missing. But for now, the pork chops demanded his full attention. He watched as the edges turned a lustrous honey brown, the glaze bubbling gently, and tested one piece with an iron skewer. It slid through effortlessly. Perfectly cooked. Owen smiled, ready to plate up the tender golden chops and enjoy the fruits of his careful cooking. Owen surveyed his handiwork and winced. The pork chop dish he'd just prepared was only rated B+, its sole benefit being a modest boost to happiness. Shrugging, he turned back to the frying pan and cracked in more eggs. Moments later, he laid the sizzling pork chops on the table and froze. The 60 fried eggs he'd set out a minute ago had vanished. Owen's eyes went wide. Seriously, you guys are absolute foodies, aren't you? From atop Dragonite's massive paw, Vulpix gave a dainty lick to its muzzle and emitted a soft, pleading mmm. Dragonite, belly swollen with satisfaction, patted itself contentedly. After all that fuss chasing down that last bite of an energy cube, the big dragon now swore these simple fried eggs were even tastier. Owen glanced toward the tree line. Mewtwo had already slipped away, saying it wanted to find more trainers and see how people and Pokémon lived together elsewhere. Owen shook his head in amusement. Why wander off when they were so happy right here? He sighed, placed the uneaten pork chops aside, and reached into his storage ball for more eggs. Soon the pan was humming again, and 30 minutes later, all 300 eggs were gone. With that, their impromptu feast drew to a close. Based on Owen's incomplete tally, Strong Chicken had eaten over 40 servings, while Dragonite had polished off more than 60, which meant Strong Chicken was about to lose its crown as the biggest glutton. After dinner, Owen finished stowing away his things and finally allowed himself to relax. He reached out and rested a hand on Dragonite's belly. Just as he'd hoped, it was wonderfully soft and warm. Dragonite, would you mind spending the night in your Pokeball? Tomorrow, I'll ask the construction team to build you a larger wooden house in the garden. Woo. Okay, Dragonite chirped happily. It had been a splendid day. Not only had it relieved its frustration in battle, but it had also tasted those delicious fried eggs for the very first time. All this joy came from the human standing before it. Now, watching Owen's hand on its tummy, the gentle dragon couldn't resist and wrapped its arms around him in a big hug. Woo. Owen found himself unexpectedly sinking into pure softness. He paused for a moment, then chuckled and returned the embrace. You really are so soft. Still nestled in Dragonite's warm embrace, Owen gently pressed the Pokeball's button. With a soft glow, Dragonite was safely tucked inside. Owen sighed contentedly. Tomorrow, Dragonite would have its new house, and tonight they both had sweet dreams to look forward to. Owen turned to Gardevoir and asked, How long can you sustain your curse ability now? She lifted her gaze. Over 2 hours, sir. Owen nodded, impressed. In just over a week, Gardevoir, already beyond level 80, had improved from holding the curse for 30 minutes to 2.5 hours. Pretty soon, she'd be able to sleep through the night in the nursery. They wouldn't have to stay apart any longer. He'd have to set up a proper room for her. Next, Owen looked at the coiled monarch snake and retrieved its Pokeball. Before he could speak, the serpent let out a sharp hiss, refusal clear in its voice. It had spent all day inside that ball, and though it sensed Owen on the other side of the barrier, it resented the confinement. Owen simply smiled and closed the Pokeball again. All right, you can come with me instead. He led the monarch snake into his room and used his psychic gift to sweep the floor clean. From his cupboard, he took a thick blanket, spreading it neatly on the floor. Then he fetched a quilt from the treehouse and laid it on top. Within minutes, he'd crafted a soft, warm nest, just right for his slithering companion. Owen patted the edge of his bed. All right, you're sleeping here beside me. How's that? The monarch snake froze for a heartbeat, then relaxed, the corners of its mouth curling upward. Shoo shoo, it replied, an unmistakable okay. Owen let out a relieved sigh. At least there was plenty of room. His room was sparsely furnished, a large bed pushed against the right wall, a simple desk tucked beside it, and the entrance door on the left. A sturdy wardrobe stood against the far wall, and in the center hung a detachable wooden treehouse, perfect for the snake to coil around. The remaining floor space was empty until Owen unrolled a thick carpet, which fit the layout just right. The monarch snake slithered off the treehouse and settled onto the rug, its body curling elegantly in the open space. But its leafy tail trailed across the foot of Owen's bed, dangling temptingly. That caught the attention of the ice-type Vulpix curled up by the wardrobe. Its bright eyes flicked open, fixated on the swaying, leaf-adorned tail. Intrigued, the little Vulpix stretched out a paw, claws extended, only for the tail to whip aside in a blur, evading the grab as if equipped with its own reflex program. Huh? Frustrated, The Vulpix pouted its tiny pink mouth, furrowing its brow. It sprang toward a different section of the tail, but once again the snake's tail slid away with effortless grace, teasing and taunting in equal measure. Owen watched the playful chase with a small smile. Despite the odd company, he couldn't remember the last time his life had felt so lively. Owen had been watching with growing anticipation as little Vulpix lunged again and again at its elusive target. Each time the fox missed, Owen's excitement mounted until, at last, the creature faltered once more. In a flash, Owen's hand shot out and closed firmly around the wriggling tail. "Ha, I got it!" he crowed triumphantly. His laughter died on his lips the instant the tail reacted. It whipped around his wrist and, with terrifying strength, began to coil up his arm. He barely had time to cry out before the serpent's tail tightened like a vice, winding him up from wrist to shoulder and hurling him headlong across the clearing. Owen hit the ground hard and rolled to a halt at the foot of the great monarch snake. It loomed above him, scales gleaming in the dappled light. "Shoo shoo," he managed to whisper, heart pounding. Chapter 111. I'm sorry, I was too careless. Owen's voice trembled as he met the king serpent's imperious glare. He'd expected a stronger body after its evolution, but he hadn't anticipated this haughty new temperament. The little vine snake that once shied away from him was gone. In its place stood a regal, high and mighty ruler of serpents, aloof and almost disdainful. The serpent flicked its tongue, rolling its golden eyes at him. Owen suddenly realized he'd been clutching its tail. Embarrassed, he loosened his grip in a hurry. "Ahem, I'm really sorry," he stammered. "Could you let me go?" With slow, deliberate grace, the king serpent unwound its coils from Owen's arm. It hissed softly, "Shoo shoo," a sound Owen had learned to translate over months of training. "You used to let me cuddle you when I was small. Now you won't even touch me." Owen blinked in confusion. Cuddle? That hadn't felt like cuddling. More like a hostage situation. He rubbed his arm where the serpent's coils had constricted, while the serpent flicked its tail dismissively and drifted away across the clearing, head held proudly high. Owen sighed. It seemed his companion's evolution had given it not just power, but a royal attitude to match, and Owen would have to relearn how to win back its trust all over again. Owen collapsed onto his bed and idly tapped the screen, showing his newest partner's status. Name, Monarch Snake. Gender, female. Nature, competitive. Rarity, gold. Individual values. HP 30, 28 plus 2. Attack 23, 22 plus 1. SB attack 31, 22. Defense 29, 28 plus 1. SB defense 26, 24, 2. Speed 34, 33. Level 41 can grow to 46. Moves, Vine Whip, Leech Seed, Glare. He leaned back, marveling at how quickly and how much she'd grown. Gently recalling the six-tailed fox curled at his feet, he switched off the light and drifted to sleep. The next morning, August 29th, Owen woke at dawn to find the fox still curled against his stomach. He carefully lifted her and laid her on the bed, then swung his legs over the side, only to feel something soft against his calf. Looking down, he discovered one of the monarch snake's velvety coils draped over his leg. Suppressing a smile, he unwound her tail and let it slip to the floor. Even so, he couldn't resist brushing his fingers along her smooth, patterned scales one last time before heading out. "So smooth," he whispered to himself as he left the room. Owen tiptoed into the breeding house and peered around. The monarch snake was still fast asleep, perhaps not the best time for a gentle stroke on Melodic. Shaking his head, he reminded himself how busy today would be. After yesterday's surprise with the 3 Beedrill, he'd resolved to make the most of every hour. First on his list was the greenhouse. Mew had returned overnight with another mysterious fruit, and Owen gently gathered it into his bag. Next, he strolled over to the plantation and reached for his Pokegear to call Huba. He discovered that Huba and her team were currently helping renovate a dessert shop in Wutong City. They wouldn't be free until tomorrow. Owen figured that Dragonite could comfortably stay inside its Pokeball for a couple of days without issue, especially after yesterday's hectic battle. Still, he decided to summon it and explain the situation in person. With a burst of wind, Dragonite appeared beside him, nudging Owen expectantly. "It'll be fine," Owen reassured him with a smile. Dragonite gave a low, relieved rumble. "Woo!" But Owen noticed a hint of embarrassment in the way his great orange eyes flickered. Despite having sat out most of the fight yesterday, Dragonite felt he hadn't earned his keep. The big Drake worried he'd simply feasted on Owen's hospitality without ever stepping up. Owen patted Dragonite's scaly shoulder. "Don't worry," he said gently. "You'll have plenty of chances to shine. For now, let's focus on today's work." Dragonite lowered his head in acceptance. Together, Trainer and Dragonite set off, ready to tackle a full day of farming, breeding, and preparate, Ion, knowing that each small step would bring them closer to their next great adventure. Owen let out a long breath of relief as he led Dragonite back to its stable. Before doing anything else, he tiptoed over to the paddock and prodded his notoriously lazy Slaking awake. Once the giant ape shook off its drowsiness, Owen called over his Rotom, which had already harvested a fresh bundle of living grass from the meadow. Clutching the verdant haul, he returned to his kitchen at the farmstead. Yesterday, he'd promised the herd of Miltank a new, green dumpling to complement their favorite milk dumplings. The process was identical, same folding technique, same steaming routine, except he'd swapped out the usual moo milk for rich sweet milk. Owen set to work, kneading dough, mixing fillings, and stuffing dozens of plump dumplings. 30 minutes later, he lifted the lid of the bamboo steamer. A soft, honeyed steam curled upward, carrying a faint, plant-scented sweetness. Owen lined the dumplings up on a platter and activated his PokéChef holo display. Instantly, the recipe's stats floated before him. A-rank grass dumpling creator's note, an ambitious blend of multiple grass-type ingredients. Effect 1, temporarily increases grass-type Pokémon skill proficiency. Effect 2, grants moves that affect plants a chance to trigger a magical mutation in nearby foliage. Owen's eyes widened. A mutation-triggering effect on plants. That sounded exactly like Serperior's Grassy Surge ability. If these dumplings truly conferred even a fraction of that power, the local flora might spring to life in entirely new ways. He carefully wrapped a dozen dumplings in a clean cloth and tied them together. With dawn approaching, it was time to test this batch on the waiting Miltank herd and see if his experimental recipe could really reshape the grasslands. Owen closed his eyes for a moment. "Wait until it wakes up, then go look for it," he murmured, an afterthought to the spirit creature he'd just sent on its errand. He shook his head, turned toward the steaming bamboo basket, and with a gentle strain of telekinesis, lifted the honeygrass dumplings into a large cloth sack. Slinging it over his shoulder, he made his way to the cowshed. Just as he stepped inside, the dairy cows began to stir. One by one, they raised their heavy heads and let out eager lowing sounds, their eyes bright with anticipation. They swayed and shuffled forward, nearly jostling each other in their excitement. Owen surveyed them with a wry smile. He'd neglected to control their rations last night, and now each animal's belly was slightly distended. "Looks like I'll have to be more careful with your meals from now on," he chided softly. He set the dumpling sack down, then arranged a few dumplings along each trough. Pulling a small wooden stool over to the nearest cow, he retrieved a sturdy pail from his storage ring. Settling onto the stool, he began to milk. The cows sighed in contentment as the first drops of milk landed in the bucket. One let out a happy low, as if commenting on the sweet, unmistakable aroma of the honeygrass dumplings still lingering on Owen's fingers. Another nudged its companion, clearly impressed by the new treat. A third simply leaned its head into Owen's hand, eyes half closed in bliss. Owen worked methodically, hand and mind synchronized, channeling just enough telekinetic steadiness to keep the flow gentle. Every so often, a cow would snuffle, sending a warm puff of air against his palm, as though to say, "This is perfect, thank you." In the soft morning light, with the smell of fresh grass and warm milk filling the barn, Owen felt a rare moment of peace. The cows would need to be watched tomorrow, of course, but for now, all was well. Owen wiped his brow as the last of the milk settled into its glass bottles. With a subtle motion of his telekinetic powers, he'd filled 7 buckets worth of moo-moo fresh milk, then neatly stacked each bottle on the cart bound for the cultivation house. Thanks to the recent improvements in flavor and texture, the milk now commanded a higher price. And with the BB Bird courier service reliably handling deliveries, there was no longer any worry about moving the product. Stepping back, Owen surveyed his fields. It was nearly September, and the summer crops, watermelons and chili peppers, were winding down. A few late plantings still clung to fruit, but most of the beds were past their prime. He made a mental checklist: clear out the spent vines, turn the soil, apply fresh fertilizer, then decide whether to sow hardy fall vegetables or expand the orchards. On top of that, he had to prepare barrels for honey wine brewing. Schufen, the plantation's owner, had told him before he left Winetown that oak barrels were the traditional vessels. Owen would need to track down a cooper or a manufacturer who could supply them in 3 days' time. Just as he was gathering his notes, Chinshu came rushing up the path, her face as pale as the milk in his bottles. "Owen, there's something you need to know." Before she could finish, a rush of worry hit him. "What's wrong?" she gasped. But all Owen could think was how the to-do list kept growing: wine barrels, soil preparation, orchard planning, and now whatever news Chinshu carried would only add to his mounting tasks. "Marula, things just keep piling up," he muttered, steeling himself to hear what fresh complication life had thrown his way. "It looks like the chapter text didn't come through. Could you please paste the machine-translated passage you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have it, I'll polish it into smooth, idiomatic English, renaming Lin Feng to Owen and ensuring he's male, while preserving all plot points and details." Chapter 112. School starts on September 1st or 2nd, right? Chinshu asked, her tone earnest. "Yeah," Owen replied, studying her bright, expectant face. Over a week ago, her Squirtle had evolved into a powerful Wartortle, and its strength had surged. When classes resumed, the first exam would be a Pokémon battle, and last semester everyone had laughed at her for having the weakest squad. This time, after 2.5 months of intense training in the East, followed by 2.5 more in the West, she was determined to leave them speechless. Owen let out a soft sigh. "All right. Just let me know when you're heading back." "Will do," Chinshu said with a confident grin, then skipped off toward the breeding house without noticing the sudden shadow crossing Owen's expression. Left alone, Owen stared off into the distance, a familiar melancholy settling in his chest. Before he could sink too deeply into thought, a shimmer of emerald light appeared at his side. Gardevoir had teleported over, its gentle eyes on him as it floated close enough to rest a cool hand on his head. "Shanai?" it asked quietly. "What's wrong?" Owen blinked, meeting its concerned gaze, and managed a small, grateful smile. Gardevoir's timing was perfect. Owen shook his head and met the kind gaze of his Gardevoir. He didn't bother pretending everything was fine. "It's not a big deal," he said. "You remember our shop assistant, right?" Gardevoir nodded. Of course she did. She'd grown fond of the girl's gentle spirit. "She started school," Owen continued, "which means we've lost our only clerk." He shifted uncomfortably. Other tasks were simple enough. Rotom could handle refilling the oak barrels, Dragonite could bring back extra Pokeballs, and Sandshrew could turn over the fields in no time. But someone needed to look after the store itself. Owen glanced at Gardevoir, then shook his head decisively. Sure, she could run the shop, but only by working from 6 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, then spending her evenings collecting berries and crafting energy blocks, every single day with no break. If he put that on her shoulders, he'd be nothing short of cruel. "I need a Pokémon that can run this house." That thought flickered through Owen's mind as he considered his options. Which Pokémon could handle all the household chores and even help out in the store? Aphrodite? Promising? Nannybug? Far too small. Magic Wall Doll? Useful, maybe, but somehow not quite right. Settling on Aphrodite, Owen summoned Rotom. "Rotom," he said, leaning forward expectantly, "are there any breeders selling Aphrodite in the Donghua Alliance?" Rotom's blue eyes dimmed with regret. "Rotom is checking." "My apologies, Master, but no breeding center in the Donghua Alliance currently has Aphrodite." Owen let out a soft sigh. Of course, it made sense that Aphrodite would be scarce. It was native only to Galar and Paldea. He flipped through his Pokédex again, scanning the entries for Nannybug and Magic Wall Doll, but neither really fit the bill. Then his gaze drifted upward to the dream of the sky drifting above. Surely that one could transform into the perfect love butler, right? Owen shook his head, amused by his own fleeting idea. Let Dream handle the billing? He could already imagine customers going in circles trying to figure it out. Better to leave Dream to run in its own lane and focus on what mattered right now. Rodom, he called. Find me a supplier for wine vessels, oak barrels preferably. On it, master. Rodom buzzed cheerfully through its little display. A moment later it added, there's a cooperative in the northwest region, specializing in Padia oak barrels. Great, Owen replied. Contact them and arrange a quote. He paused. His vineyard wasn't small, just 1/30th of his total honey grape holdings sat on this plot. How many kilograms of fruit could he harvest this season? And how many barrels would that fill? Let me run the yield estimates, Rodom offered. Please do, Owen said, leaning back against a sun-warmed crate. With the orchard's numbers in hand, he'd finally know how many barrels to order and how much wine he could bottle. Owen tapped his chin. First, Rodom, what's the typical honey grape yield per acre? Rodom's electronic voice replied almost instantly. Under normal management, you can expect 3,000 to 5,000 kilograms per acre. Poor care can drop that to just 1,000 or 2,000. Let's be optimistic and use 5,000, Owen said. On 5 acres, that's 25,000 kilograms of fruit. Every kilo of grapes produces about 6 taels of wine. That's 150,000 taels, or roughly 15,000 liters. An oak barrel holds 250 liters, so even though 60 barrels would suffice, let's order 100 to be safe. Got it, Rodom answered. In moments, he buzzed Lodo. Lodo says the barrels are back-ordered and delivery could take a while. No problem, Owen said with a shrug. When they arrive, I'll send Dragonite to fetch them. Autumn was approaching, and nighttime temperatures were already dipping. The newly brewed wine could simply be stored in the cool cowshed until it matured. Owen allowed himself a satisfied smile, one logistical headache solved. He stood and stretched, then glanced at the last item on his list. What to plant on the remaining plots? Owen had always favored tree fruits. After all, they produced the highest quality energy blocks and sold for top dollar. But today's experiment with sweet honeygrass balls gave him a fresh insight. When plants mutate, their properties change, and everyday seasonal vegetables might yield surprising new ingredients for his recipes. If he devoted a small patch of land to them, he could diversify his dishes even further. With that realization, Owen tapped into his greenhouse control panel and reallocated the plots. I'll pull out a handful of those reward seeds for tree fruits and mix in some vegetable varieties, he mused aloud. After running the greenhouse for several days, his system inventory already felt like a treasure hoard, brimming with every Pokémon delicacy imaginable. Yet, despite the abundance, he'd been stymied by choice. He owned dozens of tree fruit seed types, but space for only 50 saplings. It was time to mix things up. Okay, let's do this, he decided. I'll plant a few of each seed, fruit and veggie alike. Turning to his loyal Gardevoir, he called cheerfully, Gardevoir, I need your help harvesting all these vegetables once they're ready. Let's see what surprises Mother Nature has in store for us. Owen nodded. All right. While Owen pored over the problem in his mind, quietly conferring with Rodom, Shenanduo hovered at his side, a gentle, almost amused smile on his face. He watched intently, as though eager to witness Owen's solution unfold. Now that Owen seemed to have pinpointed a way forward, Shenanduo convinced himself that his only task would be to handle the inevitable aftermath. Or so he believed. Chapter 113. At first light, Owen stepped into the clearing and froze. Overnight, his little patch of earth had been transformed. The soil, once scattered with the odd tomato or melon plant, was now neatly furrowed in long rows. Sandshrew was already at work up front, plowing the ground with steady, efficient tugs. Behind him, Owen knelt and sifted seeds across the ridges. Tomatoes here, watermelons there. At the far edge, Melodic glided through the irrigation channel, shooting precise jets of water that traced every planted seed like clockwork. From the forest's edge, Serpent and Vulpix padded forward. Owen called them over. Serpent, Vulpix, hold on a second. He reached into his pack and pulled out the last of his sweet honey grass dumplings. Try this, he offered, holding one toward Serpent first. Serpent's eyes brightened with curiosity. It slithered up, leaf tendrils unfurling behind its neck, and gently grabbed the dumpling. At the first bite, it paused, puzzled. This one tasted only a hair sweeter than before, so why the special request? Before it could decide, Melodic's water jets rippled behind, sending a faint mist over the field. Vulpix flicked its tail, sniffing the air. Serpent, still chewing, watched Owen finish planting the last row. Then, almost imperceptibly, a soft green glow pulsed from between Serpent's scales. Owen stepped back, a satisfied smile on his face. Today's lesson was just beginning. Owen watched, wide-eyed, as an emerald wave swept across the entire plantation. In an instant, the freshly sown seeds began to shoot up through the earth, their tiny green shoots unfurling at astonishing speed. He swallowed hard. He hadn't even planted his golden kelp yet. Whatever this green grass field ability of the monarch snake was, it was getting ridiculously powerful. The sight tugged at a memory of that old Pokémon movie he'd once watched, the one with Pikachu and the girl named Coco, where a mysterious creature could supercharge plant growth just like this. What was its name again? Celebi? Salud? Either way, if the monarch snake's field was anything like that, its power was climbing into legendary territory. Owen's mind jumped to two other Pokémon known for fertility and renewal. Breloom, whose spores made fields fertile and ensured bountiful harvests, and Xerneas, the majestic stag that could revive dying forests. If this snake's ability was anywhere near as potent, he could probably grow whatever he wanted, and in record time. His pulse quickened. But where was Xerneas now? Was the great stag still sleeping somewhere in its hidden grove? Owen stared out over the quiet reservoir, his mind racing. Had Xiaoji in the Kanto region already begun his journey? With Mewtwo intent on hosting a grand game, Xiaoji would have to set off soon, if he hadn't already. Owen's speculation wasn't baseless. The Donghua Alliance had just rolled out Rotom phones here, and if this region, the most wired and networked of all, was this plugged in, the technology would spread like wildfire to other regions. When that happened, Owen's breeding lodge would be perfectly positioned to expand and become a household name. A soft whimper from the Vulpix at his feet broke his train of thought. He bent to scoop up the little fox, only to realize his hands were smudged with mud. With a small sigh, he set the Vulpix down, rolled up his sleeves, and waded into the shallows to wash his hands clean. As he rinsed away the last of the grime, Owen glanced over at his Mienshao, still merrily spraying arcs of water into the air. A grin spread across his face. "All right, Mienshao, let me feel that ice punch of yours." "You," the Mienshao replied, halting its splashes and bowing its head in readiness. It was game on. Owen grinned as he climbed onto Melodic's back, glancing toward the water diversion channel that led from the reservoir out to the wider river beyond. "All right, let's do it. Let's go for a ride." He'd been laboring under the sun all morning and was dripping sweat, but the thought of exploring the river on Melodic's sleek back filled him with excitement. She hadn't ventured beyond the reservoir since he first coaxed her into the shallows. Melodic gave a delighted trill, flexed her fins, and shot forward through the cool water, carrying Owen smoothly toward the channel's entrance. On the shoreline, the Alolan Vulpix, who had been watching with bright, curious eyes, started yelping in protest. Before Owen could stop her, she darted into the shallows and bounded onto Melodic's flank. Hey, what's going on?" she seemed to ask. Laughing, Owen scooped up the Vulpix. "Don't worry, I'll take you along too." Of all his Pokémon, the little Vulpix was by far the most inquisitive. With her safely settled, Melodic swam on, slipping from the wide expanse of the reservoir into the newly widened channel. It was just broad enough now for her graceful form to pass through without difficulty. Even so, Melodic was rarely tempted to leave her home waters. Owen had urged her to explore the river every chance he got, but she always returned to the reservoir's crystal-clear depths. More than once, while milking the Miltank herd on the pasture above, he'd glimpsed her shadow beneath the surface, quietly watching him from the sparkling water. Now, at last, they were finally heading out together. To the left of the water channel lay a broad, open clearing. To the right, Owen had planted a vibrant border of flowers. If you strolled a little farther, you'd spot a row of abandoned cottages sitting just beyond the blooms, former homes in Wutong Town, now long since vacated. Inside the channel, Mienshao drifted gracefully, occasionally turning its head for a furtive glance at its trainer. It was a rare moment of peaceful calm. A few visitors, drawn by the riot of color in the flower bed, paused to admire the scene, but when they looked toward the water, their jaws collectively dropped. There, slicing through the channel's glassy surface, was an unbelievably elegant Mienshao. One man rubbed his eyes in disbelief and shouted, Mian Xiao! Oh my God, what a breathtaking Mian Xiao! Instantly, every head snapped toward the water. As the spectators watched, they realized it wasn't just the Pokémon that was extraordinary. It was its trainer, Owen, balanced effortlessly on Mian Xiao's sleek back. The silk leash that had been held taut slipped from his fingers, coiling softly into the water. I can't believe it, one onlooker murmured. I saw a Mian Xiao in a breeding house on Douyin ages ago. It looked gorgeous on video. But this is something else. Seriously, another voice chimed in. I thought it was all filter and editing. Here's a revised, polished version of the scene with Lin Feng renamed Owen and the prose smoothed out for an English-speaking audience. Honestly, calling it a beauty treatment is downright insulting, one customer muttered as they lounged in the breeding house's waiting area. Right? Owen barely leaves the place, another chimed in. All he ever does is whip up energy blocks and cook meals for his Pokémon. You'd think a big breeder's resort would at least offer massages or skill training sessions for visitors. You need a measuring tape? Someone interrupted with a laugh. Above their chatter, Owen perched on Mian Xiao's broad shoulders, arms folded. He let their teasing drift away while he entertained a very different question. If he ever opened a gym, what type should he specialize in? His team was almost ridiculously varied. Psychic, water, fire, flyting, fairy, ice, grass, dragon, even bug if you counted that one Metapod. Every Pokémon but Metapod had already reached elite rank, his little Vulpix included. He grinned at the thought. Why limit himself to one type? An all-type gym, he murmured. Make challengers beat every elemental badge to earn mine. As Mian Xiao trotted steadily along the path, Owen closed his eyes and let himself imagine the future challengers lining up at his doors. Determined faces, sweaty grips on Pokeballs, and the roar of battle awaiting them. The idea thrilled him so much that the corners of his mouth lifted in a confident smile. Owen shivered as a blast of cold air swept across his face. Glancing down, he found the cunning Vulpix staring up at him with an impish grin, and in the next instant the fox Pokémon spat a mouthful of icy foam right into his face. What are you doing, Vulpix? Owen sputtered, wiping the frosty spray from his cheeks. Chapter 14, September 1st, Dusk. The last light of sunset bathed the town in warm hues, as if an unseen artist had brushed the streets with gold. Owen stood atop the gentle rise overlooking the main square, feeling a pang of melancholy. Before him, Qinshu hefted her space backpack, ready to set out on her own adventure. You've already earned your trainer's license, Owen said, forcing a smile. Now just knock out your school courses, and then you can hit the road. In the Donghua Alliance, the rules for newly licensed trainers were more relaxed than in other regions. Once you'd passed the license exam and kept up with your academic subjects, you were free to begin your journey. There was no strict waiting period. Owen wanted to encourage her, so he put on his most upbeat tone. Got it, Owen, Qinshu replied brightly. She gave him a quick wave and slung the straps of her bag over her shoulder. Wait, Owen called, stepping forward. He reached into his pocket and produced a small, smooth storage sphere. He held it out to her. Be careful out there. You never know what dangers lie beyond town limits. Don't worry your parents, and remember to send us word whenever you can. Qinshu caught the sphere, turning it over in her hand with a grin. Thanks, Owen. I'll write as soon as I settle in at the academy. Owen nodded. The girl squared her shoulders, took a deep breath of the cooling air, and then set off down the winding road that led out of town. As her figure grew smaller in the fading light, Owen exhaled slowly, a mixture of pride and longing in his chest. Her journey had just begun, and soon his own path would follow. Owen pressed a small storage orb into Qinshu's hand. Here, some Squirtle energy cubes. Guard these with your life. Startled, Qinshu fumbled for a moment before slipping the orb safely into her pack. Owen waved her on. Come on, hurry up. We don't want to miss the last bus. She flashed him a grateful smile and raced out of town, her heart pounding with excitement. Only when she reached the edge of the settlement did she finally glance back. The cultivation house was hidden from view now, but the streets were lined with blooming flowers and bustling with travelers loading their gear. The place was more alive than ever. If all goes well, she thought, Once I finish my cultural exams, I can set off on my real journey, just like I've always dreamed. Meanwhile, a man in his 40s standing nearby nudged her with a friendly grin. Hey, little Shu, are you off to school with that backpack, or is it a travel pack? Chinshu didn't hesitate. School first, then travel. The man nodded approvingly. Smart. Education's important, and I've heard your brother's energy cube techniques are extraordinary. It would be amazing if you became a Pokémon master, Owen said with genuine enthusiasm. Heh, how could I ever compare to you, Owen? Chinshu replied, offering him a shy smile. Oh, look, the bus is here. With a wave, she boarded, and it pulled away. Owen closed the store door quietly, watching until the bus disappeared down the road. He'd miss having Chinshu at his side. No one managed the register as efficiently as she did. From her Pokeball storage, he'd already set aside several energy modules, enough to help her Squirtle evolve. Beyond that point, she'd have to find her own way. There was no time to linger on farewells, though. Turning to Gardevoir, he called out, All right, Gardevoir, let's get this wine started. Today's delivery included 25,000 kilograms of honey grapes and a stack of new oak barrels. If Owen tried to process all that by himself, it would take weeks. Even with Gardevoir's telekinetic help, he doubted they'd finish before midnight. Her stay time on the farm was limited. Gardevoir, he prompted. Gardevoir bowed once, then vanished in a shimmer of green light, reappearing above the vineyard. Owen watched her glide over the rows of ripening grapes, inspiration sparking in his chest. Gathering his focus, he lifted off the ground. He wasn't as naturally graceful in fly as his elegant companion, but for tonight's work, he'd give it his all. Owen strode into the cowshed, already planning how to keep the place clean while he washed the honey grapes. First, he retrieved all the oak barrels from his storage sphere and lined them up neatly against the stalls. That way, the rest of the shed would stay dry. Next, he summoned Cielio and Mienshao with a quiet call from Gardevoir. He positioned a large steel basin at the threshold between the cowshed and the garden, then asked Mienshao and Cielio to pump water into it. The runoff would flow straight into the garden, rather than puddle on the barn floor. With the basin filling, Owen opened his storage sphere again, pulled out the first crate of honey grapes, and dumped them in. He sprinkled in a pinch of salt, just enough to brighten the fruit's natural sweetness, then let telekinesis take over. He and Gardevoir lifted and tumbled the grapes gently in the basin, while Mienshao and Cielio maintained a steady trickle of fresh water. When the grapes were spotless, they floated free of debris. Owen guided the clean grapes with a sweep of his mind, rolling them toward the barrels. But before he sealed them away, there was one more step: crushing. Memories of his previous life came rushing back. He'd made wine once, and the process was nearly identical. Only then, squishing the grapes had meant stomping through vats with bare feet. Here, he used his telekinetic grip to break each berry's skin, letting the juice spill out and swirl in the basin. Within minutes, the first sweet, rosy stream of grape must glided from the basin's spout into the waiting oak barrels. Owen smiled. Superpowers, he thought, were undeniably useful. Owen surveyed the endless rows of grapevines stretching before him. 20,000 kilos of grapes, or more, waiting to be processed. With no mechanical press at hand, he had only his Pokémon team. His mind flicked to the odd contraption he'd hoped would upgrade by now, but it was still just a clumsy bamboo press. Thankfully, Gardevoir's telekinesis offered a much gentler, more precise touch. Gardevoir, let's start with a light squeeze, he said. The elegant psychic type hovered above a cluster of plump purple grapes, her hands shimmering with telekinetic power. One by one, the skins split, yielding their sweet juice as smoothly as butter. Owen watched the clear liquid trickle down into the waiting vat. From the other side of the press came a tired bark. Cielio, affectionately dubbed Seal by the team, was the first to flag. He'd been spraying streams of water to wash off leaves and dirt, but his breaths had grown ragged and his movements sluggish. Cielio, you look exhausted, Owen called. Take a break. Melodic, could you handle the rinsing for a while? Cielio lifted his head and let out a small, exhausted squeal, as if protesting that he still wanted to help. His flippers trembled beneath him, and he nearly toppled over onto the dusty ground. Before he could hit the earth, Gardevoir's telekinesis gently cradled him, setting him upright again. Easy, Seal, Owen murmured as he knelt beside the blubbery Pokémon, stroking his slick head. You've done more than enough today. You're doing great. Celio's eyes gleamed with relief and pride. Throughout this harvest, all he'd wanted was to contribute. He'd been cooped up, eating and drinking, while the others pitched in on the vineyard. Even Torchic, who had already evolved into Combuskin, was helping carry baskets of grapes. Rest up, Owen told Celio. Melodic's got this. He rose and glanced at the graceful, water-shimmering serpentine Pokémon gliding toward the press. The others, Gardevoir, Combuskin, and now Melodic, made a formidable team. With their combined efforts, Owen felt confident they'd finish today's harvest long before sunset. And so, with gentle voices and encouraging smiles, Owen's team fell into a steady rhythm. Gardevoir crushed, Melodic washed, Combuskin hauled baskets, and Celio rested each time he needed to catch his breath. Daylight would soon fade, but, by then, the winery vats would be filled to the brim, and Owen couldn't be prouder of every single Pokémon at his side. Ball Sea Lion had always wanted to be useful to its trainer, Owen. It could join him for morning runs, whip up meals in their little camp kitchen, and even press sweet bamboo into a refreshing juice. Still, it felt inferior, convinced that only after evolution would it truly be able to help Owen. Lately, though, it couldn't even manage the simplest task of rinsing berries, and the disappointment gnawed at its heart. All it wanted was to do more. Suddenly, a brilliant white light flared around Ball Sea Lion's small body. At the same time, the creature's drained energy surged back, filling it with renewed strength. Its shape rippled and shifted beneath the glow, and when the light finally faded, the familiar round form had been replaced by something entirely new. Where once its skin had been dark blue, patches of pale azure now shimmered. The spherical tip of its nose had turned a soft pink. From its head dangled several small, bead-like orbs that swung like braided tassels, and elegant, wavy frills traced its torso like the hem of a skirt. Driven by the intensity of its own longing to help Owen, Ball Sea Lion had evolved. Owen, who had been watching in awe, took a half-step forward. "Huh? Flower? Flower!" he breathed, reaching out toward the creature before him. Chapter 115, Owen stood frozen for a moment, then shook his head and let out a low sigh. Since feeding his seal the SSS-grade energy core, its innate weaknesses had been steadily corrected, its remaining deficiencies almost entirely bridged. It was on the verge of another evolution, yet Owen never expected it to unfold like this. The newly evolved creature, a flowery sea lion, tilted its head and let out an excited cry. Its bright, petal-patterned mane rustled as it looked up at him, eyes sparkling with a question. May it spray water again? Owen grinned and nodded. Go ahead. After all, the whole point of this evolution was to help wash the honey grapes. Had he stopped it now, the sea lion would only feel more uncomfortable. He tapped his wrist display to review its updated status. Pokémon, flowery sea lion. Gender female, ability torrent, rank blue tier, individual values, HP 16, attack 10, special attack 17, defense 20, special defense 19, speed 6, estimated level 21 to 24. Moves Slap, Call, Water Gun, Icy Wind, Aqua Jet, Baby Doll Eyes. Sing Owen's lips curved upward as he watched the flowery sea lion raise its head and unleash a powerful jet of water. The cool spray shimmered in the late afternoon sun, drifting over the cluster of ripe honey grapes and washing away dust and pollen in gentle arcs. The evolution had not only enhanced the sea lion's strength, it had refined its control too. As the final droplets splashed onto the fruit, Owen knew this was only the beginning. With the flowery sea lion's new abilities at his side, he was one step closer to uncovering the full potential of the SSS-grade energy core. And whatever challenges lay ahead, he felt ready to meet them head-on. Owen glanced at the stats floating before him. Intimacy, 97. I really like you. Cooperation value, 70. I can support my trainer again. He watched Celio standing at attention, its expression as earnest as ever. With a satisfied nod, Owen realized the rank indicator had finally flicked from green to blue, and he'd also unlocked several new abilities along the way. Patience, he reminded himself with a small smile. His hunch had been right. Processing every single honey grape in a single night was simply impossible. 2 days later, on the morning of September 2, Owen, Gardevoir, and Melodic finally finished sorting and crushing the last of the fruit in the greenhouse. By nightfall, The oak barrels in the courtyard were heaving with sweet juice and grape pulp. Owen let out a deep breath of relief. All that's left now is a week of primary fermentation, he mused. After that, we'll strain out the skins and seeds and let it rest another week. He ran a hand through his hair, then surveyed the barrels again. Too bad we don't have proper fermentation vats, he sighed. If we did, we could outsource the winemaking and likely improve the quality, but these barrels will have to do. Turning to his three companions, he offered a heartfelt smile. Thanks for all your hard work tonight. Melodic's eyes shone with pride, and Celio gave a delighted bark. Gardevoir inclined her head serenely, then gently guided Melodic and Celio back toward the reservoir. Owen watched them go, already looking forward to tasting their homemade honey wine. Owen glanced at his watch. It was already 8 o'clock in the evening. Since he'd switched on the lights in the cowshed at 4, the three combi had kept working at the 2 sweet honey trees by the door, gathering nectar without pause. He'd watched them fly back and forth all afternoon, just as industrious as ever, rising before dawn and only pausing at dusk. Tonight's bright lamps had kept them going even longer. Despite his admiration for their diligence, Owen gently urged them back inside. Then he turned to the herd. His mill tank lay asleep in a corner of the shed, bellies noticeably rounder than a few days ago. Whether from extra milk production or simple fattening, he couldn't tell. A thought flickered through his mind. Maybe he should set aside a circular exercise yard in the pasture so they wouldn't be confined here all the time. But he shook his head, deciding to leave that plan for another day. After one more look at his metapod, motionless and silent, Owen straightened up and headed toward the plantation. September's starlight was dim, but the moon still shone brilliantly, washing the plantation in silvery light. Gardevoir had already slipped away. Melodica and Sea Lion had dived beneath the pond's surface, and Strongbringer was dozing in the chicken coop under the old oak, mercifully silent for once. 2 days earlier, Owen had built a large portable wooden barn for Strongbringer and Dragonite, spacious enough to accommodate Strongbringer's evolution when the time came. Now Dragonite had claimed a sunny corner of the garden, inspecting every flower with gentle curiosity. Around the pine grove, his flock of 10 Pit and 10 Pidgeotto kept watch. 5 of those Pidgeotto had already evolved into Pidgeot, bringing the total number of Pidgeot under Owen's care to 15. As for Mew, that mischievous sprite flitted in and out as it pleased, especially at night, but Owen didn't mind, provided it left his things undisturbed. Once all his Pidgeotto had made that final evolutionary leap into Pidgeot, Owen thought with a grin, he'd be ready to launch a true long-distance courier service. Owen had barely launched his Pidgeot Express Energy Cube delivery service when trainers from distant cities started calling, asking if he could ship supplies their way. He immediately refused. The journey would be too long and too risky for his Pidgeot. He was only comfortable making runs around Wutong City. After settling that matter, Owen wandered back to the plot where he'd planted fruit seeds and vegetables a few days before. He'd used the top-grade Jin K-La fertilizer on the fruit seeds, and already they'd shot up over a meter tall, their leaves lush and green. The vegetables, by contrast, had only received ordinary care, apart from the growth buff provided by the monarch snake's green grass field ability. This was part of Owen's little experiment. Would purely natural plants, nurtured under the monarch snake's aura, have a higher chance of mutating? He walked the rows of cabbage, well over 100 heads now, and examined each one closely. None showed even the slightest sign of mutation. He checked the newly sprouted bitter melon vines next. They, too, were completely normal. The odds of mutation, it seemed, were still frustratingly low. But Owen shrugged it off. He'd just have to be patient and keep experimenting. Owen stepped out of the breeding house and paused at the doorway, its soft lights still glowing, but he didn't go inside. Instead, he made his way to the kitchen, where he examined the single black eyelash resting on his palm. It was Dream's eyelash. According to the system notification, it could serve as an ingredient, but Owen struggled to imagine what you'd do with an eyelash, until an idea struck him. Why not crush it and turn it into an energy block? He muttered. Without hesitation, he set to work. First, he gathered 6 different berries, each one known to boost one of a Pokemon's 6 base stats. Rumor had it that Dream carried the genetic potential of every Pokemon, able to manifest any skill they could learn. If that was true, blending all 6 stat-boosting berries together made perfect sense. He also fetched a fresh bottle of Moo Moo milk. He quartered the berries and tossed them into his blender, pulsing until they formed a smooth, colorful puree. Then he gently crumbled Dream's eyelash into the mixture, stirring just long enough to disperse it evenly. As the blend cooled slightly, he poured in the milk, sealing the mixture in its mold. About half an hour later, Owen peeled away the mold to reveal a softly glowing energy block, humming faintly with unspent power. He smiled. This creation might just give his team the edge they needed. Sure, please go ahead and share the full chapter text you'd like me to revise, and I'll transform it into a polis. Head, idiomatic English version with Owen as the main character. Legendary Dream Energy Cube. An extraordinary energy cube forged from dream genes and stuffed with an assortment of ripe tree fruits and rich Moo Moo milk at its core. This potent creation bestows 5 unique effects on any Pokemon that consumes it, but most benefits only trigger once per Pokemon. Effects. 1. Stat Surge, first consumption only. Immediately after the first bite, 3 of the Pokemon's individual values, IVs, are each boosted by +3, chosen at random. 2. Random Dream Skill. Usable once per consumption. Upon eating, the Pokemon can perform a finger flick that unleashes one random Dream-type move known by Dream. The move's effect can't stack, and there's a chance the Pokemon permanently learns it, highest on the initial use. 3. Rapid Skill Mastery, long-term consumption. Continuous intake accelerates the Pokemon's overall skill proficiency, helping it master moves more quickly. 4. Blessing of Dream, first consumption only. Grants a permanent 30% increase to the power of all Psychic-type moves. 5. Blessing of the World Tree, first consumption only. Grass Pokemon only. Grass types gain a permanent 30% boost to move power and a 30% increase to luck. Owen held the glowing energy cube in his palm and whistled in amazement. The moment Dream activated it, the young Pokemon had spontaneously unleashed one of its learned techniques, chosen entirely at random from its entire moveset. Better yet, there'd been a slim chance of a breakthrough, an unexpected spark of insight that could teach Dream an entirely new skill. And if fate were kind, even a rare exclusive ability from a legendary beast might be borrowed in the process. Too bad it all depends on luck, Owen sighed, shaking his head. He'd watched countless seedlings in his mutation trials fail to evolve, a clear reminder of how low the odds really were. Still, these energy cubes offered more than just random skill unlocks. Each cube also raised one individual stat by 3 points, an incredibly valuable bonus in any breeding or training regimen. Plus, thanks to the World Tree's blessing, Dream's affinity for grass-type energy increased by 30% when consuming the cube. Better yet, Owen had just processed enough World Tree fruit to produce over 40 of these cubes. That meant every Pokemon in his care could get at least one chance to boost its stats, or even try for a mutation. He rubbed his chin, excitement building. If Mew's delicate eyelashes could somehow be refined into a consumable extract, if Lugia's scales held untapped potential, imagine the breakthroughs he might achieve. With 40 cubes at his disposal, Owen's entire experiment was about to go to the next level. He tucked the energy cubes into his satchel and headed back to the enclosure. It was time to see exactly what these miracles of nature could do. Could the Phoenix King's feathers work, too? Owen put away the freshly made energy blocks and withdrew another plume from his storage orb. It was Lugia's silver feather, though it looked more like a strand of hair, softly glowing with latent psychic and flying energy. He hesitated a moment, then placed it into the synthesizer alongside the others. No need to rush the process. First, all his Pokémon would have to absorb the blocks made from Mew's energy. "All right, everyone gets a turn tomorrow," he murmured, stifling a yawn. He carefully stowed the energy blocks, then headed off to bed. Unnoticed, a small figure drifted into the kitchen soon after Owen fell asleep. In the dim light, it paused, sniffing curiously, as though searching for something. Its gaze settled on the fruit blender, the very machine Owen had used to craft the energy cube. A faint trace of unfamiliar aura still lingered around it. Even more alarming, the blender appeared damaged. Mew cocked its head in confusion. Legendary Pokémon rarely left anything behind. So why did the appliance feel broken? And whose presence had been here? Mew's whiskers twitched. Something strange had happened, and it intended to find out what. Each of the world's mythical guardians, Pew, pursued a different purpose, but each purpose also offered a rare respite from their endless duties. Take the Phoenix King, for example. Over his countless lifetimes, he longed to discover souls untainted by malice. Every so often, he'd materialize in the mortal realm and scatter rainbow-hued feathers in hidden glades, quietly testing the hearts of those who found them. Lugia, by contrast, favored subtler gifts. He would infuse a city's hearthfires with a whisper of his power, summoning gentle winds to dance through its streets, and now and then he'd leave behind a single feather, a living bridge between human and legendary being. Those who claimed his feathers could tap into their latent magic. Truth be told, most mythical beasts were bound to their own domains, sworn to uphold sacred responsibilities that tethered them in place. Their mere presence could unleash chaos, so they seldom dared roam freely. After millennia of stewardship, what small joys remained, but these occasional gestures of goodwill. Owen couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for them. How could any creature so rooted ever know the freedom to travel, to explore? As long as the world tree thrived, he himself could wander unbound, roaming wherever his curiosity led. A soft, plaintive sound cut through his reverie. Yo, meow. September 3rd. Owen woke before dawn. By first light, he had rounded up every one of his Pokémon and set a single energy cube in front of each of them. Even Pidgeot and Frozlass, who loafed high in the treetops, weren't exempt. Their cubes were trimmed slightly, just enough to whet their appetites. Only his Gardevoir received an extra portion. Psychic powers like hers demanded more fuel. One cube he set aside for later. He planned to feed it to his superior once training began. A lone Starly peered at its cube with puzzled eyes, then looked enviously at the others, quietly munching away. When had it lost so many feathers? It rarely came to this part of the forest. Surely the thinning must have happened only recently. The little bird ruffled its remaining plumage in confusion. Before long, Owen noticed two of his Pokémon giving each other a curious look. Superior and Gardevoir both began to vibrate with energy. Gardevoir, especially, felt her strength surge. She could almost sense her telekinetic power swelling by 30%. Whatever had changed overnight, they were already beginning to feel its effects. Owen watched in fascination as Garnado's psychic energy flared around it. This wasn't just a routine power-up. Its telekinesis had actually increased by a noticeable percentage. What kind of food could produce an effect like this? Seeing Garnado's wide-eyed look, Owen gave a casual shrug. "It's just the food," he said with a small grin. "Trust me, it works." Garnado tapped its head in acknowledgement. It remembered the last time Owen had given it an energy cube, proof enough that his trainer wasn't ordinary. After a heartbeat of surprise, the Pokémon settled back into composure. Still, the memory of another breeder who'd used emotional cultivation to push his Pokémon beyond their limits flickered through Garnado's mind. That trainer had failed in the end, but Owen was different. A sudden cry cut through Garnado's thoughts. "Frost!" Owen called. In the clearing ahead, a Frostmilk's fur began to glow a vivid green. Then, in one brilliant burst, a stream of emerald flame shot from its mouth straight into the sky. The other Frostmilks scattered in astonishment. Owen himself froze, eyes locked on the blazing arc overhead. For a long moment, everyone stood utterly speechless, stunned by the raw power Owen's team could unleash. Gardevoir reacted without hesitation. In a blink, it teleported skyward and, drawing on its formidable telekinetic power, corralled every flicker of flame before they could rain down. Hovering above the battlefield, it finally had a moment to take in what it was seeing, and froze. Those weren't ordinary embers. The fire glowed an eerie cobalt blue. This had to be the doing of Frostmilk. Chapter 117. Stop! Hold on! Owen slammed a hand down on Frost's shoulder, yanking her back from the glimmering energy cube. The other Pokémon froze mid-step. Owen drew a deep breath and addressed them all. "This isn't just a snack," he began, waving his free hand for emphasis. "Once you consume one of these energy cubes, you'll randomly unlock a special move, sometimes even a move you'd never expect to wield. But please, don't trigger it without thinking it through." Inwardly, Owen was still reeling. He hadn't expected Frost, the little milk cream fairy Pokémon, to reproduce Reshiram's exclusive blue flame with nothing more than a flick of her frosting-like tendrils. The brilliant azure fire had erupted just moments ago, scorching the tablecloth. Its raw power was undeniable, even if Frost herself lacked the muscle to sustain it. Had his Gardevoir been a split-second slower, things could have gone much worse. Gardevoir floated down from the air, landing gracefully beside them. She blinked at Frost, disbelief in her eyes. That flame, is that really Reshiram's move? Frost's head drooped, and her creamy swirls quivered in embarrassment. Owen crouched and gave her a gentle pat. Sorry, Frost. I should have explained better. Around them, the rest of Owen's team leaned in, curiosity shining bright. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. If any of you want to try the cube, come see me, one at a time. And remember, the first time you use a newly unlocked move, you've got the best chance of learning it permanently. So choose your moment and your move wisely. Owen watched Frost, his tiny, rosy sprite topped with a little strawberry, tilt her head in surprise. Frost, he prompted gently. What's wrong? She replied, her voice wobbly. Owen knelt beside her. Just moments ago, Frost had unleashed the blue flame with perfect control. Now she stared at her hands as if trying to recall that moment. Frost, she murmured, almost to herself. I think I just activated a new skill. Closing her eyes, Frost focused intently. When she opened them again, Owen expected to see the familiar azure blaze, but instead, her body shimmered with a soft, multicolored glow. Owen frowned. Magic flash. That wasn't the blue flame at all. According to the Dream Energy Block's description, after consuming it, you can potentially master the very skill you first manifest. Frost had already used blue flame once, and she still hadn't taken her second bite of the block. So why was she showing a completely different ability? Frost? Owen asked again, reaching out. The milk fairy tilted her head, watching the prismatic lights dance around her. The sensation felt identical to blue flame, but the effect was unmistakably new. Why had it changed? They exchanged uncertain glances, each wondering what the Dream Energy Block would reveal next. Owen stared in disbelief. Could it really have played the fingerwave move by chance, unlocked two entirely new techniques, and then, just like that, mastered fingerwave itself? He rubbed his eyes and activated his elf interface. Elf name, Frostmilk Fairy. Gender, female. Appearance trait, Sweet Veil. Rarity, purple. Base stats, individual values. HP 27, attack 14. Special attack 23, defense 29, special defense 27, speed 10. Estimated level 18 to 19. Known skills, decoration, sweet scent, fragrance mist, flirtatious display, fingerwave. Intimacy, 94, loves you dearly. Enjoyment meter, 40, curious what's wrong. Oh my god, Owen whispered. It's really true. Frostmilk's large eyes went wide. A faint tremor ran through her frosty wings. Frostmilk, she murmured, voice quivering. Am I hurt? Owen hurried to her side. No, don't worry, he said, laying a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're not sick. I just pushed you too hard trying out that new move. You're a bit exhausted. Rest for a while, and you'll bounce back in no time. Frostmilk let out a small, relieved sigh. Owen continued gently, but you're still too young to use fingerwave all the time. Let Nalista stick to your regular skills until you gain a little more strength, okay? Frostmilk nodded lightly, curling her frosted tail around her feet as she drifted into a quiet rest, the glow of her wings dimming with each slow breath. It'll be much better once you grow stronger, understood? Owen asked. He blinked twice to clear his head, then gathered all the Frostmilks around him. Each of them radiated energy well above level 10, but the fingerwave technique was brutally unpredictable. No one could say what attack it would trigger next. What if this time it spat out Arceus's punishment gravel and drained their life force entirely? Frostmilk! Frostmilk! They echoed, stamping their feet in unison. Cha! From the corner of the clearing, the brute, who'd been busy showing off its meal, looked up at Owen with wide, eager eyes. It had watched the tiny Frostmilk unleash that brilliant blue flame and felt a surge of envy. It had to try it. All right, Owen said with a smile. Let's see what you've got. He stepped back, curious to discover whether any Pokémon could actually learn a brand new move from fingerwave. Cha! The brute's eyes lit up. If the small Frostmilk could command such a scorching blaze, it was sure to unleash something even more powerful. With unwavering confidence, it executed the finger wave technique. A handful of tiny sparks fizzled out of its mouth. Cha! The brute blinked in disbelief as it stared at the minuscule embers, its triumphant grin fading into a puzzled frown. It seems luck isn't exactly on your side. Owen couldn't help but grin as Strong Chicken's sparks fizzled out harmlessly. He turned to King Serpent, who gave a slight nod. Instantly, verdant energy rippled across the grass, transforming the entire training ground. Command, summon grassy terrain? Owen murmured, impressed by how effortlessly the field had shifted beneath his feet. He scanned the remaining opponents, melodic, gliding, poised, and serene, the fiery blast Frostmilk had unleashed at the start, and that lone Pidgeot, which had once performed a breathtaking sky attack. Aside from that initial blue flame, none of their moves had been especially memorable. The one extraordinary skill, the Divine Bird Attack, hadn't even been retained permanently, a rare feat to be sure, all of which only proved how fortunate Frostmilk truly was. All right, you three can keep playing without me. I need to swing by the shop, Owen called, brushing grass off his jacket. By the time he and Frostmilk Fairy reached the cultivation room, it was already 8 o'clock. Owen pushed open the door to a chorus of disgruntled voices as a line of customers, freshly arrived and impatient, poured in. Sorry for the wait, everyone, he apologized, offering a sheepish smile to the murmuring crowd. I'll be right with you. Owen wiped his hands on his apron, looking sheepish as he faced the steady stream of early customers. Hey, Owen, one of them called out. Now that your cashier quit, you've pushed your opening time back, right? Owen managed a weak smile. Yeah. When Mia was here, we opened around 6. Now it's closer to 8 before I can unlock the doors. A cough interrupted him. He cleared his throat, trying to sound confident. It's a lot for one person. I've still got to milk the cows, gather honey. Another customer chimed in sympathetically. And you're making energy blocks, tending the plantation out back, plus caring for all those Pokémon. Have you thought about hiring help or offering new services? Owen nodded. I'm working on it. Ideally, I'd love to find a Pokémon to help run the breeding shop, something like an Iguanchi. If any of you hear someone selling one, please let me know. The group exchanged apologetic looks and shook their heads. No one had leads. Owen stood quietly for a moment, then steeled himself. Though Rotom hadn't uncovered a single listing for an Iguanchi online, Owen knew he had another option. After closing, he'd film a short clip and post it on his social channels. He did have a few 100,000 followers after all. Maybe someone out there could point him in the right direction. Chapter 118. A few days had passed since Owen uploaded his Seeking a Love Steward video, and the silence was deafening. By September 10th, he still hadn't heard a single reply. The staff at his cultivation house were getting restless. They needed recruits, and fast. Owen sighed as he locked up the storefront for the afternoon. He just finished selling a fresh batch of energy cubes, but even a tidy profit couldn't lift his spirits. He settled into the small bench where Chinshu had sat during her last visit, the wooden slats still warm from her presence. Owen missed her more than he'd expected, only a few days apart, and already he felt a dull ache in his chest. With nothing pressing to do, his days slipped into a routine of tending the shop, then retreating to the back room with Gardevoir to craft new cubes. When boredom threatened, he'd strike up a conversation with Frostmilk Fairy or playfully tussle with little Vulpix. Gone was the relentless 9-to-9 grind of his old life. Instead, he found himself on a farm schedule, up at 6, lights out by 9. All the same, the quiet weighed on him. The cultivation house needed people. Chinshu's absence left a hollow spot in his day, and no one had answered his video plea. Owen tapped his foot, staring at the door, hoping for a familiar figure to walk in. At Wutong No. 1 Middle School, the atmosphere was electric. Every new term kicked off with a high-stakes opening test, an assessment so vital it counted toward both the college entrance exams and the final GPA. In the courtyard, clusters of senior students lined the edges of the open-air battlefield, leaning over the ropes and whispering excitedly. They craned their necks to watch each challenger enter the arena, speculating on strategies and power levels. After all, these early battles often revealed who among them would rise to the top by year's end. Laughter and chatter rose in waves as friends traded opinions on the latest matchups, their eyes never straying far from the combatants. The air buzzed with anticipation. Wutong's fiercest minds were ready to prove themselves. And in a few moments, the first duel of the term would begin. Owen stood quietly on the sidelines, tuning into the buzz of voices around him. "That's Owen, isn't it? I heard he just passed his junior trainer certification this past June, and caught himself a Squirtle," one spectator whispered. "Yeah," another replied, shaking his head. "But it's only been a few months. The examiner this time brought out 6 Pokémon, half of them grass types. Talk about tough luck." "Besides," a third chimed in, "his Squirtle looks pretty slow. I wonder if summer break did anything to sharpen its skills." "I've heard it still can't even fire off a proper water gun," someone added with a smirk. "Don't count him out yet," another voice argued. The examiner's first pick was a fire-type rock mouse. If Owen plays his cards right, he could still pull this off. "And get this," piped up a final trainer. "Over the summer I discovered a breeding shop with top-quality energy blocks. It's way off the beaten path, but they deliver by Pidgeot." Owen let a quiet smile drift across his face. Let them whisper and speculate. When they finally saw what Squirtle was capable of now, they'd wish they'd never doubted him. Owen hesitated for a moment before finally nodding. The examiner cleared his throat. "Candidate Owen, are you ready to begin?" "Ready," Owen said, quickly pulling out his Pokeball and tapping it. With a brief flash, a Squirtle materialized on the field, only this Squirtle was anything but ordinary. Its shell gleamed under the stadium lights, its rippled ears stood proudly, and its tail curled in a perfect spiral. Most striking of all was its size. At roughly 1.3 meters tall, it towered over the average 1-meter Squirtle. A hush fell over the crowd. "Is that really a Squirtle?" one spectator whispered. "Are they using growth hormones?" another murmured. "Not at all," someone replied. "Well-trained Pokémon can exceed average heights if they're fed and exercised properly. Look at that conditioning." Even the examiner blinked in surprise but said nothing more. He raised his arm. "The test begins now. Owen, you may attack first." "Go, Squirtle," Owen called. "Show them what you've got. Use Rain Dance." Squirtle stomped lightly, its cheeks glowing with stored water energy. Within seconds, the air thickened with moisture. A dark cloud formed, rumbling softly, and a gentle rain began to fall across the testing grounds. The rain summoned by the Squirtle wasn't just a passing shower. It drenched even the spectators standing nearby. Owen stumbled back, eyes wide, staring at Zhongxing's Squirtle in disbelief. "Rain Dance? A weather move? How is that possible?" The examiner, equally astonished, muttered under his breath, "It's only a Squirtle. Has it really learned Rain Dance? And with such a wide area of effect?" He frowned. Normally, a water type would have the advantage over fire, but now that the Squirtle controlled the weather, the odds had shifted even further against the Fire Rock Rat. Refusing to let his Pokémon be overwhelmed, the examiner shouted, "Fire Rock Rat, use high-speed stars." Raindrops sizzled against its simmering hide, irritating the Fire Rock Rat to the core. Water was its greatest weakness, and it seethed with fury at the Squirtle's wet assault. Gathering fiery energy along its back, it flung a volley of star-shaped firebolts straight at its opponent. Owen reacted in an instant. "Squirtle, burrow into your shell." Clearly, after that first match, he'd learned a great deal, and so had his Pokémon. Rockrat's attack came roaring in, a swarm of rock shards hurled like shooting stars toward Squirtle's shell. But when Squirtle peeked out, not a single crack marred its carapace. The judge's eyes widened in disbelief. He had deliberately avoided a fire-type move. Yet this water-type Pokémon shrugged off his rock volley without even flinching. Could Squirtle possess an extraordinary defense stat? The possibility flashed through his mind, but it offered little consolation. He kicked himself for ignoring his classmates' advice. Next time, he'd send out a grass type instead of presumptuously relying on rocks. On the sidelines, Chinshu grinned and called out, "Squirtle, water gun!" Summoned by the downpour, Squirtle's water gun surged with added power. The first jet of water forced Raticate to dodge, but the second struck it squarely, sending it tumbling backward. Before Raticate could recover, Squirtle let loose a relentless barrage, each stream of water hammering the battered rock rat until the outcome was unmistakably clear. The water gun struck true every time. No matter how the fire rock rat darted and ducked, it couldn't evade of Owen's Squirtle. On the third torrent of high-pressure water, the rock rat collapsed, unable even to rise. The examiner allowed himself a nod of approval. Candidate Chin Shu, fire rock rat, defeated. Score, 100 points. He glanced down at the little Squirtle with unmistakable respect. You've trained this Pokémon exceptionally well. Chin Shu lifted her head, beaming. Thank you, sir. With Squirtle at her side, she stepped out of the arena and was almost instantly surrounded. A dozen classmates crowded in, their eyes wide with astonishment. Chin Shu, what did you do over summer break? How did Squirtle get so strong, let alone evolve? Your Squirtle even had the examiner's rock rat on the ropes, someone marveled. How is that possible? Chin Shu stood tall, but when she tried to explain, she drew a blank. All she'd done was buy a few energy cubes at the Pokebreeder's shop and feed them to Squirtle. Beyond that simple care, she'd no secret training method, yet somehow her Squirtle had grown into a true powerhouse. She could only offer a puzzled shrug as her friends buzzed around her in disbelief. Owen didn't hesitate. You want to know the secret behind Squirtle's strength? Go to the breeding house just outside Wutong Town. That's where you'll find the answer. He figured that once he set off on his journey, he could always direct Nyan who asked this question to that very breeding house. Chapter 119, September 11th dawned bright and clear, lifting Owen's spirits as he looked around his empty storefront. He'd meant to start repairing the road outside weeks ago, but running the shop and handling daily chores had kept him too busy. Now, standing in the warm afternoon light, he regretted the delay. Just as he reached for the door to lock up, a figure appeared at the edge of town, a man wearing a floppy hat and sporting an unruly beard. He walked straight toward the shop, his steps slow but determined. Owen paused, curiosity prickling at him. When the stranger finally stopped in front of the door, he tipped back his hat, revealing long, tangled hair that nearly fell over his eyes. His appearance was rough around the edges, but there was something earnest in the way he regarded Owen. "Hello there," Owen said, slipping easily into his role as a Pokémon breeder and shopkeeper. "How can I help you?" The man's cloudy eyes brightened into a comfortable smile. "Brother Lin, right? I heard you're looking for a pet servant." At the sound of his old online handle, Owen felt his heart quicken. Brother Lin was the name he'd used on forums and social platforms, so this must be someone who followed his posts. And by pet servant, he could only mean the Pokémon he'd been dreaming about acquiring. Owen returned the man's smile, excitement bubbling up inside him. This was exactly the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Owen's heart raced as he blurted out, Yes, I really need them." The man gave a slow nod. "All right, a few years back, I captured 2 domestic servants, beasts, really, for my own use. Recently, they had 2 offspring. If you'd like, I can have them delivered to you." Owen's eyes went wide. You mean? He couldn't believe it. Actual servants, ready-made, and being given away. The man smiled. "Absolutely. They're barely weaned, though, so they'll need basic training. Their parents will teach them household chores and how to care for Pokémon. It shouldn't take more than 2 weeks." Thank you so much," Owen stammered, already picturing life with trained helpers at his beck and call. He felt as though he were floating on air. Then the man's tone shifted. "There is one small favor I must ask of you in return." He swept a lock of hair from his forehead, revealing an unexpectedly sharp, almost decadent face. Owen blinked. He knew that face from somewhere, but he couldn't place it. Owen's smile faltered at the man's request. 2 rare Pokémon, freely entrusted to him. There had to be a catch. Frowning, he said, "All right, what do you need?" The man's expression turned earnest. "I'm arranging a birthday cake for September 15th, he explained, "and I want you to make it something that will truly delight my Beedrill, just like your special juice does for your Pokémon." "Delight my Beedrill?" Owen echoed, puzzled. He remembered the neat white slip of paper Frosty Milk Fairy had handed him when he returned to the cafe. Could this trainer be the one who commissioned the cake? Ordinarily, Pokémon find joy in the simplest things, but if the man asked so earnestly, there must be more to it. Owen gave a thoughtful nod. "May I meet your Beedrill first?" "Of course." The man held up a Pokeball, clicked it open, and released a shimmering green Beedrill. Its wings vibrated like humming saws as it hovered before them. At the sight of the giant hornet, Owen's heart skipped. Suddenly he recognized the trainer. He knew exactly who stood before him, and what this cake would really have to be. Owen's eyes widened as he took in the man's unusual partner. A differently colored Beedrill. "You're the bug-type king, Liangfeng?" Liangfeng offered a wry smile. "That was a long time ago." Owen couldn't blame himself for not recognizing him right away. Nearly 10 years had passed. Back then, Liangfeng and his rare, alternate-colored Beedrill had dominated alliance competitions, routinely finishing first or second. He'd even claimed third place at the Zongheng Conference, the Donghua Alliance's most prestigious tournament. Inspired by his success, countless aspiring trainers had ventured into the wild in search of powerful bug-type Pokémon, convinced they too could rise to the top. A young Owen had watched in awe, amazed that anyone could train a Beedrill to such heights. After his meteoric rise, the Donghua Alliance had invited Liangfeng to become their first and only bug-type king. Then, just as suddenly, he vanished from the public eye, leaving behind nothing but legend. Now, standing before him once more, Owen realized that this long-lost champion was more than just a story from his childhood. He was real, and right in front of him. Rumors swirled around Owen's sudden retirement. Some said he'd driven his Pokémon too hard in his early years, leaving them with crippling internal injuries that demanded years of rest. Others whispered he'd fallen in love, married, and started a family, casting aside his life as a trainer. Still more claimed bug-type Pokémon simply lived too briefly. Surely his legendary Beedrill had died long ago, and without its power, Owen had no choice but to quit. Standing before him now was that very Beedrill, and there was no denying the truth behind the gossip. The Pokémon's once gleaming exoskeleton was pitted with scars, each gouge blackened by time. Its armored plates, once hard and taut, hung loose and soft like damp parchment. A faint, sour stench of decay lingered in the air. Worst of all, the right eye that had once shone with razor-sharp focus now glowed a dull, milky white, completely blind. Owen's heart sank. He had hoped, against hope, that his old partner might still be strong. But the broken shell before him told a different story. Beedrill was past the point of recovery. Owen's breath caught as he reviewed the creature's status screen. Name, Beedrill. Gender, male. Ability, Insect Premonition rank. Purple individual values. HP 25, Attack 28, Defense 8, SP AC 11, SP Def 25, Speed 31, Effective level 45 to 69, Max 74. Skills, Silk Spinning, Impact, Sword Dance, II/, Destruction Ray, Shadow Clone, Random Attack, Pursuit, Missile Needle. Profile. As a youngster, this Beedrill endured endless battles. Many of its injuries were never properly treated, leaving a chronic wound in its right abdomen that flares up with agonizing pain every night. Time has not been kind. Its doctors estimate there's less than a month left in its life. Intimacy, 0. It doesn't know you. Pleasure value, nigh 40. It really ought to die, then it won't drag Owen down. Owen swallowed hard. For a purple-rank creature, Beedrill's stats were respectable, even bordering on regal. Yet behind those numbers lay scars both seen and unseen. How many fights had it survived? How many nights had it writhed in pain? And most crushing of all, the emptiness in its heart. This was no eager warrior craving glory. It was a broken soul, too weary to care about battle or victory. As Owen watched the pulsing health bar on the screen, he realized that what Beedrill needed most wasn't another fight. It was a reason to keep living. Chapter 120. Beedrill's wings fluttered weakly as it glanced first at its trainer, then across the clearing at Owen. Owen stood perfectly still, heart pounding. After a long, steadying breath, he stepped forward. "If you trust me, let me handle this," he said softly. "I'm confident I can help her recover." The trainer shook his head, forcing a small, sad smile. "Thank you, Owen, but I'd rather stay with her a little longer." He knelt beside Beedrill and gently ran a hand along her battered thorax. "I always thought she was indestructible. Whenever she got hurt, I wrote it off. Just another battle scar. I let the injuries drag on until they piled up." He hesitated, brushing away a bead of sweat. "She's such a show-off. Even now, when she can't lift off properly, she still tries." His smile turned rueful. "Guess I wasn't a very good trainer. I never learned to read her condition." Beedrill gave a soft buzz and leaned into the comforting stroke. The trainer chuckled wryly. She adores sweets, poffins, honey treats. Doctor warned me to keep her away from sugar until she's healed, but a little comfort can't hurt right now, can it? Owen watched the pair in silence. He knew how sacred the bond between Pokémon and trainer could be, and how desperate they both must feel. Still, he was determined. Time was short, but with his abilities and the god-level breeder's methods, he believed he could turn this around. All they needed was a chance. All right, Brother Owen, let's do as it prefers. Owen inclined his head in understanding. Got it. Reaching into his storage sphere, he withdrew a single SSS-grade energy cube, one of the rarest items in his reserves. Its primary effect was to purge hidden injuries and mend deep-seated wounds, exactly what the injured Beedrill needed. Despite the cube's immense value, Owen held no regrets about giving it up. In this situation, no other enhancement would compare. Curing the Beedrill's lingering trauma was paramount, even if its remaining lifespan remained uncertain. How it had carried on through such grievous injury was a mystery that spoke to its resilience. Holding the cube out, Owen said, "This will clear its old wounds. Give it to the Beedrill and let it absorb the healing. You'll see an improvement soon." Really? Feng accepted the cube with a cautious nod. Thank you, Brother Owen. With that, he turned to administer the cube, hopeful that it would restore the Beedrill's strength and spirit. Owen had spent years carrying Beedrill from region to region, seeking out every renowned Pokémon doctor and breeder he could find. Time and again, they managed only to dull the giant bee's agony for a few days. Even the most skilled healers could only assuage the hidden wounds through psychic Pokémon hypnosis. He didn't imagine that a small-town breeder could do any better. As the local breeder hefted Beedrill onto his shoulder, Owen called after him, "Don't forget to give him the sweet bamboo juice." "Right," the man said, scooping 3 bottles of amber-colored juice from the shop counter. He slung the bottles into his pack, hoisted his bike over its kickstand, and rode out of town with the injured Beedrill in tow. By the door, 2 tiny frost-tinged fairies, known among the locals as the Frostmilk Sprites, watched them go, their gossamer wings quivering with worry. One turned to the other and whispered, "Shuang Shuang, do you think he'll make it?" Owen paused, his hand on the shop's weathered doorframe. He met their anxious gazes and let out a slow breath. "I'm afraid not," he admitted. The fairies hovered closer, their voices barely above a breath. "Shuang Shuang, it's so heartbreaking," they murmured, then settled in silence as Owen closed the door behind him. "Will it leave its trainer if it dies?" one Frostmilk whispered. "Shuang Shuang," another murmured. "Don't say goodbye. Goodbyes hurt too much." "Shuang Shuang," came the soft reply. The exchanged glances pulled Owen back to a painful memory. These Frostmilks had already lost their first trainer once before, and the recollection of Klee's farewell still stung. They'd only hatched recently, and their new trainer, Owen, had shown them nothing but kindness, so most days they felt safe and content. But Beedrill was different. It was dying and would never be able to return to its trainer's side. If Beedrill couldn't fulfill that bond anymore, what would become of them if Owen perished? The Frostmilks wondered, their tiny hearts pounding at the thought of abandonment. The more they imagined their own trainer fading away, the heavier their chests felt. Their frosty paws trembled, tears glittering at the corners of their eyes as they all stared up at Owen. "I'm only 18 days old," their unspoken plea trembled in the air. Owen looked down at them, stunned by the depth of their worry. He'd known they were young, but to see such earnest fear reflected in their icy gazes felt almost surreal. Gently, he knelt and gathered the Frostmilks into his arms. "Hey," he said softly, "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Their bodies shivered against his warm jacket, and for a moment, the weight of their collective fear seemed to ease. As Owen stroked the silvery tufts atop their heads, he vowed silently. No matter what battles lay ahead, he would be there to see them through, so long as he drew breath. I stepped forward and offered them reassurance. "Don't worry, we still have plenty of time. We'll all live a long life together, and I'll cook for you every single day." "Really?" Shuang Shuang's eyes lit up with hope. "Really," I repeated, giving her a firm nod. Their anxious faces finally relaxed, and I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. But despite their calm, a weight still pressed on my chest. I closed the door behind them, guided the frost fairies safely back to their room, and then made my way to the cowshed. Inside, Metapod waited quietly in its stall. Over the last few days, I'd noticed its rigid shell softening, faint movements rippling beneath the surface. It was clearly on the brink of evolution. I crouched down beside it. "It won't be long now," I murmured. "You're about to evolve." Metapod gave a low puff in response, the little tremor of its body betraying both anticipation and a hint of nervousness. "If you evolve," I said, gently tapping its shell, "you'll be able to eat all kinds of delicious food and grow even stronger. How does that sound?" The Metapod shuddered with excitement. It had been stuck in this cramped stall for who knows how long, and rumor had it that the big milk tanks in the barn had started keeping honey-glazed green dumplings on the menu. Metapod could practically taste them already. If only it had a mouth. I smiled. Change was coming, and soon this little fellow would be ready for anything. Owen laughed as he watched his Metapod buzzing with excitement. "Just you wait. Once you evolve, I'll whip up something truly delicious for you." The little steel bug let out a happy puff, and Owen scooped up 3 honeybees that had been hovering nearby, carefully transferring their golden honey into a jar. Then he led the frost fairies toward his kitchen, determined to turn what had been intended as a simple birthday cake into something far more special. "Sad," he called over his shoulder. In the kitchen, Sai, one of the frost fairies, stood at the counter wearing a pristine white apron as she molded crystalline energy bars for the next day's training. Technically, her powers kept her spotless, but Owen insisted the apron made her look the part of a proper baker. "Okay, everyone, let's get to work," Owen said, spreading out bowls and utensils. "We need to make a few extra cakes tonight. If we can bring these treats to that giant bee drill, maybe it'll stay with its trainer a little longer." "Frost!" the frost fairies chimed, their wings sparkling as they fluttered around the table. Sade smiled and set her energy blocks aside. "Got it," she said, tying her apron more securely. Owen opened his storage sphere, rifling through flour, eggs, and a handful of secret ingredients. Under he warmed kitchen lights, the team buzzed with excitement, ready to bake the most unforgettable cake yet. At last, bowls piled high with stamina, restoring fruit were set before him. Owen's pulse quickened. This was exactly what he'd been waiting for, to find out if he could create a meal capable of extending a Pokemon's lifespan.